finally managed to beat this insanely tough game. The teenage gamer sat in front of the monitor, feeling a mix of joy and relief. 10 years he'd been grinding, studying every detail of the game, and nobody before him could even get halfway through the levels. Only he managed to win. After some time, a slight regret appeared on the guy's face. He remembered the characters who were forced to leave the game during intense battles. It was especially hard to realize the loss of the Saint, a high-ranked character who made it to the final, but her departure was inevitable and left a void. Lucas, the main character of the game, survived, and that became the main achievement. The young gamer thought about how he didn't plan to save all the characters and accepted the consequences. The toughest level with Lucas was beaten by an ordinary person. His gamertag typical nerd now held the top spot in the ranking chat. Standing among the corpses, the character Lucas showed no emotions, even after defeating the boss. This strange hero remained a mystery to the player and raised questions about motivation. Sitting in front of the monitor for a long time, the gamer analyzed the path he'd taken. He tried to understand Lucas's behavior, but the character remained incomprehensible, as if he had his own will. The game developer should reward whoever beat all the levels, the young winner thought. Not only him, but his gamer buddies were expecting recognition and bonuses too. Before he could enjoy the victory, he heard a notification. The screen lit up with a new message, and typical nerd was shocked when he read the text from the director of Empire Defense himself. The message expressed gratitude for showing interest in the game and for achieving victory. The director admitted he'd long lost hope for the finale. Typical nerd had mixed feelings from such attention. The winner's pride gradually shifted toward embarrassment, and it seemed the reward no longer brought the same joy. In subsequent letters, typical nerd learned about the upcoming second stage of the game, and the developer planned to offer testing to him specifically, admiring his ability. He couldn't believe that the creator of the masterpiece himself would stoop to correspondence with a player, and at first took the creator for a self-proclaimed mister, doubting the seriousness of what was happening. Suddenly, the monitor screen began displaying blurry images and strange symbols, as if the tech itself started transmitting mysterious messages without explaining why. Out of nowhere, a powerful explosion thundered with a bright flash that blinded his eyes, and the world momentarily lost its familiar outlines, leaving a feeling of chaos and danger. The blast wave forcefully knocked down a young soldier in parade uniform, throwing him aside. The ground shook, and the air filled with dust and burning embers. Stones, wall debris, and burning chunks rained down, and the soldier, trying to protect himself, fell to the ground, covering his head with his hands, feeling relentless danger around him. Several subsequent explosions filled the air with the sharp smell of gunpowder. In the distance, people in uniforms and armor were approaching, creating a feeling of approaching threat. The young soldier found himself in the epicenter of events, lost his cool from not understanding what was happening and, not choosing his words, shouted a series of curses, trying to express his rage and fear. A bit later, a whole regiment of soldiers with spears and red banners boldly waving in the smokescreen appeared before his eyes. The atmosphere was tense, and every step could cost a life. Loyal warriors hurried to prevent enemies from penetrating the fortress walls, block the path, and stop the enemy's advance by any means. The young fighter watched, not understanding what was happening. He sat among the rubble and shards, as if in a movie, feeling the war with every fiber of his body. Every movement of the enemy seemed to him both distant and frighteningly real. Suddenly, a stocky soldier in armor approached him, causing internal tension. The young warrior didn't understand who was in front of him and what to expect from this person, but readiness to defend intensified. Their swords clashed with a deafening clang, heralding a merciless battle. The opponent's strength was palpable, but the young man tensed up, trying to anticipate every move and not allow defeat. Before they could exchange blows, the warrior in armor suddenly fell face down in front of the young fighter, breaking into apologies and pleas for mercy, causing the young man confusion and doubt. At that moment, the young man realized that the Imperial Highness was himself. Awareness of his own role covered him with both pride and fear of what was happening. An attempt to calm the servant was interrupted by another explosion. The wave from it threw the young man aside, forcing him to focus on the battle again and make quick decisions to survive. Coming to his senses, he realized it was a bomb, and the enemy's attacks were intensifying. Every moment required lightning-fast reaction and awareness that the fortress's defense depended on him personally. In the crowd of subjects, the same phrase was repeated like an echo, "Don't let enemies climb the fortress walls." The young warrior understood that now the responsibility lay entirely on his shoulders. Everything mixed together, people, voices, stones, gunpowder, and fire. The battle raged, sparing no one. Blood flowed at the young warrior's feet. Bodies fell. This was a terrifying spectacle of war. From behind the high wall came strange sounds, growling, blows, the crack of metal. The howling of warriors and the steps of heavy equipment merged into one loud chaos, capturing all the fighters' senses. Unexpectedly, something terrible appeared before the young warrior. A giant spider the size of a human appeared on the battlefield, its skin shimmering with magical crystals, sparkling in the fire of battle. The warriors of the Imperial Highness, knowing no fear, rushed at the multi-legged enemy. They fought like shadows among the flames and smoke, throwing themselves into mortal combat without hesitation. Following the command to immobilize the insect, a fierce battle ensued. Soldiers attacked with all their might. Their blades sparkled. Blood and sparks from collisions flew in all directions, creating chaos and terror. The young lord entered the battle. His body trembled with fear. His heart pounded wildly. He saw the spider, giant and deadly dangerous, and realized the fragility of his own life on the field. Looking point blank at the opponent, he couldn't determine where the dream was and where reality was. All sounds, fire and smoke merged into one terrible stream, from which it was impossible to look away. Understanding the inequality of forces, the young man tried to command the monster, but the spider, as if knowing no fear, ignored the commands. A feeling of helplessness squeezed his chest, giving birth to despair and rage at the same time. He had a premonition of a lethal outcome and couldn't accept such a death. Cold horror froze in his eyes. His body seemed to turn to stone, but his consciousness tried to find at least the slightest possibility to survive. Suddenly, from the thick smoke screen, footsteps were heard, a glow appeared, and a fair-haired young man stepped onto the battlefield. The young lord didn't understand who came to help and where the unexpected savior appeared from. The next thing that was heard from the darkness was the sensation of an order to deny reality, after which sharp blows of swords rang out, echoing in the empty corridors of the castle. The fair-haired youngster without hesitation rushed straight into the paws of the huge monster, knowing no fear, and began to chop up the monstrous spider, with precise movements tearing apart its hard armor. When the insect was completely dismembered, a new character appeared before those present in all his glory, his figure radiating confidence and power, commanding respect from all witnesses. The fair-haired warrior approached the frightened young man, carefully observing him and trying to understand why the Imperial Highness looked so unusual, almost confused. While the new participant in the battle was interested in whether the Emperor was wounded, the Lord himself noted to himself that somehow he felt acquainted with this brave man, as if he had seen him before. After a few minutes of the young warrior's reflections, he was struck as if by lightning. He realized that standing before him was a character from the most difficult game in the world, whose name was Lucas, and this discovery shocked him. Lucas turned out to be extremely perceptive, carefully studied the Emperor's face, and instantly noticed surprise in his eyes, understanding that the Lord had again forgotten his name, which caused a quiet smile. However, the Imperial Highness began a stage of denial. He couldn't believe what was happening, resisting reality, as if the very air around was trying to reject the events unfolding here. Two young warriors stood shoulder to shoulder on the battlefield, among the ruins and remains of the recently killed monster, assessing the situation and preparing for new challenges lurking beyond the horizon. The entire area and surrounding people seemed painfully familiar, and then, typical nerd realized that before him was not the Imperial Highness, but an ordinary gamer who somehow ended up in the new version of Empire Defense. Not holding back emotions, typical nerd cursed. It's one thing to sit at home and masterfully participate in this carnage, and quite another to be on the other side of the monitor, where only you can save yourself. Lucas's call seemed to tear typical nerd out of the gripping horror. Now, Lucas for typical nerd was not a character, but a friend and protector he could lean on. The fair-haired warrior explained to his lord the severity of the situation and the duty to confront the army of black spiders advancing on them, whose steps were felt by every nerve. Lucas asked typical nerd to be vigilant and patient, because in half an hour it would get dark, and the spiders that attack them and the military base lose activity and attack power at night. The gamer named Typical Nerd couldn't stop thinking about why Lucas was protecting him and why everyone here called him Your Imperial Highness, as if he really was an important figure. Dusk fell, and the spiders withdrew to their positions. Typical Nerd began questioning the fair-haired young man about the time and location. He answered with honed precision. February 28th, 649 by the Imperial calendar. Looking at the military base fortress, Typical Nerd caught déjà vu. At some stage of his game, he had already encountered a date that would come tomorrow, March 1st, 649, as if history was repeating itself. This was the date of the beginning of training that everyone went through. Ash von Hyde Evershade suddenly burst from Typical Nerd's lips. "This is my virtual name. Call me only that," he shouted to Lucas, demanding recognition. Typical Nerd was extremely upset about what character he represented in this game. Here he wasn't a gamer, but the worst commander, through whose fault a large part of warriors and allies died. It was his lot to go through training in the worst way, because one day, this character would leave the castle, which would lead to irreversible consequences for the entire game world and its inhabitants. Regardless of the difficulty of the levels, among which was a hellish one, this mega game about defending the Empire became famous because only one person in the world beat it. In training, there was a system window, and typical nerd most likely wouldn't be able to pass it completely because the conditions were built on the guaranteed loss of a beginner. The training level initially sentenced the gamer to defeat. At the very beginning of the story, Lucas alone ran from the aliens, trying to survive in chaos and continuous danger. The game lasted 3 years, but already at the start there was a difficult task: defeat monsters, hunting, which would become possible only in a year and a half. Ash von Hyde Evershade needed to find a way out at any cost, which didn't actually exist, and every step only brought him closer to a new trap. There were more than 1,000 levels with black spiders, and the castle walls were fragile. The only weapon for defense remained the mana cannon, but defeat seemed inevitable. The only winner of the game became its direct participant. He needed to approach each level analytically, building strategy and anticipating consequences. At the Man of Steel level, the player had no ability to save or reload the game. Any mistake meant the final end of the attempt and loss of all efforts. A person who spent half a year of his life on this game got used to constantly being in tension, in search of instant solutions, which gradually became part of his reality. Typical Nerd sincerely believed that his gaming experience would now come in handy like never before. Typical Nerd ordered Lucas to gather all subordinates to find a way to save themselves and go from difficulty to difficulty. Slowly, the conference hall began to fill with people who, for Typical Nerd, were previously just game characters. Kirem, a petite red-haired girl with eyes full of determination, attracted attention. Chuck, a tall man with a formidable face that reflected all the horror of years of war, stood in the corner, assessing the situation. His gaze was stern, but it showed readiness for action. Darkoot, a four-eyed nerd by appearance, looked insignificant, but behind his calm exterior lay the ability to perform tasks when it was necessary for the team. Typical Nerd felt joy seeing them alive and well, but the professional gamer understood that a sad ending awaited each one ahead, and this caused internal tension. When all the characters took their places, Typical Nerd began giving out tasks. Everyone had to prepare for tomorrow's mission, understand their duties, and show maximum skills. Kirem was the first to receive the task. She carefully listened to Typical Nerd's instructions and was fully ready for feats, understanding that the safety of the entire group and the success of the operation depended on her actions. Kirem possessed 2 gifts: magical fire attacks and the ability to cast spells on spells. She was tasked with standing as a shield before the spiders, repelling their attacks. Chuck, who specialized in attacks, got the task to penetrate the enemy's rear and disrupt the formation, using his skills for maximum destructive effect. Darkoot, by his nature a healer, under Typical Nerd's leadership turned out to be a sniper, combining healing allies with precise strikes on enemies, providing support at a distance. Lucas also wasn't left without work. He had to hold the front line at the wall, becoming the commander of the rest of the army, directing their actions and maintaining discipline on the battlefield. After assigning tasks, an awkward silence hung. Chuck's explosive shout tore through the atmosphere. The experienced soldier considered Typical Nerd's plan disastrous and destructive for the whole team, feeling the threat. Typical Nerd understood the soldier's indignation, but could only justify himself by saying he was acting according to the role of the character he turned out to be, embodying Ash von Hyde Evershade. Seeing the downcast faces of subordinates, Typical Nerd reminded them of his status as the Emperor's son, officer, and commander-in-chief of the Corps, emphasizing that disobedience in this game was unacceptable. Chuck considered him crazy, giving illogical orders. Typical Nerd acknowledged these qualities, but it was precisely them he had to apply in practice to realize his prototype. If they wanted victory, Typical Nerd couldn't lose initiative. He understood he had to act in accordance with the character, and therefore pulled his sword from the sheath, preparing for action. He declared his commander's right, demanding unquestioning obedience. Mercilessly, with the sword blade, he struck Kirem, demonstrating determination and readiness for tough measures. An ominous smile appeared on Typical Nerd's face. He understood that everyone present had abilities and tasks, but his role was to be a psychopath, leading the team to victory. A whisper of discontent and contempt rolled through the hall. Typical Nerd approached Kirem, intending to use her skills and capabilities according to the plan he had carefully developed. The commander reminded Kirem of her ability to resist fire, which arose in childhood during a goblin attack on the village, which made her a valuable team member in critical moments. Previously, the game didn't require frequent use of Kirem's character, but now, Typical Nerd was building new plans and counting on her much more actively, considering the strategic significance of her skills. Greatly emboldened by his ambitions, Typical Nerd approached the game's creator, warning of his intention to pass all levels and, after victory, deal with him personally. Finishing his speech, Typical Nerd brought his apologies to Kirem for the radical approach to training fighters, understanding that the methods were too harsh and required courage. Turning to Chuck, Typical Nerd reminded him of his childhood misdeeds when he was a thief, and the soldier didn't ask the boss where he knew such details from. Professional pickpockets have the ability to remain calm before danger, and this is exactly what the commander required from his subordinates in any situations. You're capable of remaining unnoticed, even in a crowded place, Typical Nerd mentally noted, waving his sword, controlling the situation and checking Chuck's readiness for orders. The experienced soldier bowed his head and began picking words, answering feverishly so as not to anger the commander-in-chief and fulfill the set requirements as carefully as possible. After changing anger to mercy, Typical Nerd turned to Darkhoot, who was cowering in the corner, noting that his vision was excellent despite the glasses, and his eyes had already seen a friend's death. Darkhoot felt deep sadness, remembering the loss, asked to return the friend, but dared to ask why the commander gathered them all and what goal he was pursuing in this situation. Kirem, Chuck, and Lucas also participated in posing the question, each reacting in their own way to what was happening, assessing the commander's strength and their own capabilities in the face of the task. But Typical Nerd addressed Darkhoot directly, reminding the crying warrior of his strength, ability to defeat the spider army, and the need to show courage before the commander. Despite personal feelings, Lucas intervened in the conversation sharply, and without warning, he reminded the commander that with any deviation from the plan, everyone on this territory would be destroyed, without exceptions and the right to error. Typical Nerd continued the discussion with Darkhoot. He made it clear to the frightened warrior that in case of failure, he would voluntarily give his life into the hands of subordinates, but while the situation was stable, he demanded complete obedience to orders. He insisted that hatred toward him or toward anyone should become a source of strength and fury in the upcoming confrontation with the spiders, and not a reason for split and panic. Typical Nerd sincerely admitted his own mistakes in command, remaining Ash von Hyde Evershade, but asked his people to believe him right now, when their survival depended on trust. The gamer who found himself inside the game honestly realized the absence of ready solutions and admitted that the only way out remained a risky all-in, where the price of delay was higher than any possible mistake. The drum beats spread throughout the area, bringing alarming news of the approaching army of monster spiders, and this rhythm pressed on consciousness harder than any words, preparing for the inevitable clash. The spider army's infantry slowly, but inexorably, approached the Empire's walls, filling the space with black movement, in which the cold discipline and alien logic of the hive were felt. The plan was to buy time, lure out the queen controlling the black spider army, and destroy her with a modernized cannon capable of turning the tide of the entire campaign. Typical Nerd understood that determining the queen's location without a map and visual landmarks was impossible, which means the first step to victory should be creating an accurate terrain scheme. The gamer winner, not losing a minute, remembered his gaming skills and experience working with minimaps, which he had seen before, and immediately began recreating them. Having found the monster's marks, finding the queen turned out to be difficult because there wasn't a single mark on the map, and Typical Nerd's plan B had to compensate for this shortcoming and ensure the operation's success. Typical Nerd gathered all the endurance potions, gave them to Chuck, and sent him outside the fortress to distract enemies, calculating that the enemy's attention would focus on his actions. Kirem participated in the operation to eliminate the Spider Queen, using fire magic to block the spider's access to the fortress and create temporary advantage for the troops. Everyone to positions, Lucas commanded, realizing that the longer the battle lasted, the higher the chances of removing the queen from the battlefield, and every moment was worth its weight in gold for the battle's outcome. Assuming Typical Nerd had completed all preparations, Lucas took a deep breath, gathered his thoughts, and prepared to give the decisive command, realizing responsibility for everyone in the army. But Ash von Hyde Evershade had unforeseen difficulties, and canceling the entire army's actions was already impossible, leaving Typical Nerd facing the unpredictability of events and the risk of failure. Lucas immediately gave the command, "Fire," and all the cannons simultaneously fired in the right direction. Explosions deafened the field, but the Spider Queen still remained invulnerable, hiding in the rear. Typical Nerd, in the image of Ash von Hyde Evershade, thought that the queen would most likely appear in the midst of the attack, and while she was holding in the rear, the entire strategy remained incomplete, and time to act was shrinking. He called Darkhoot to him and asked if he could see the queen on the field, but the Four Eyes could only make out a mass of spiders, while Typical Nerd was sure that among them the target was hiding, which needed to be watched. The horned monster with eyes full of fire, standing opposite Darkhoot as if watching him, created tension, and typical nerd felt that it was his gaze that was looking for the queen, preparing for the next step in the dangerous game. Typical nerd calmed Darkoot down by saying the monster wasn't as scary as it was painted, especially if you go against it with a cannon. The feeling of confidence gradually strengthened, tension subsided. Typical nerd told Darkoot that the cannons were turned toward the enemy. He took all responsibility for the plan on himself, allowing the guy to focus on the task, not thinking about possible mistakes. Typical nerd spoke convincingly. Darkoot became braver, understanding that soldiers weren't responsible for the battle's outcome, but only carried out orders, which gave a feeling of protection. After Ash added that Darkoot's shot would avenge the fallen friend, the guy activated the 1,000-mile eye function, and fear finally disappeared, leaving room for determination. The core flew out of the cannon and flew toward the target. Fractions of seconds dragged slowly. Time seemed to stretch as the projectile flew through the air, leaving behind a light trail of energy. Suddenly, an explosion thundered in the distance. A pleasant understanding appeared that the enemy target was hit, and tension changed to a brief feeling of victory and satisfaction from precise action. Hyde Evershade asked the lookout to report the situation. The answer was brief. The projectile fell right in the epicenter of all monsters gathering, which ensured maximum effect from the attack and joy for the team. The accurate hit became the reason for praising Darkoot for good vision and excellent sniper skills. His confidence grew, and colleagues noted the accuracy of actions without excessive demonstration. Ash treated Darkoot's praise with irony. He understood that in a situation where the question of life and death stands, sometimes you forget you're a four-eyed nerd with a nerd's appearance, and only the result is more important. Peering into the distance, typical nerd understood the enemies had taken the attack, but the herd of black monster spiders didn't stop moving, demonstrating that the battle wasn't over yet and new trials awaited ahead. Due to worry about possible failure, Ash took the telescope in his hands and carefully assessed the severity of the situation. The spiders were advancing, their number and speed were alarming. The Spider Queen showed increasing confidence, giving orders to the regiment. She ordered to form a square, strengthening discipline and organization of her fighters. Hyde Evershade was unpleasantly surprised. Their plan to eliminate the queen didn't work, and now he understood the opponent possessed not only numbers, but also tactical mind. Through telescopes, it was visible how spiders were heading toward artillery installations. The situation wasn't going according to plan, and tension among defenders only grew. Here, typical nerd had nothing left but to curse and get angry. He realized the Spider Queen possessed a high level of intelligence and was capable of predicting opponents' actions. Meanwhile, Chuck ran out of potion vials. He sat confused on the forest edge, not understanding how to change the situation and support the fighters at a critical moment. He thought about escape, but this thought seemed shameful for an imperial warrior. Honor and duty kept him in place, despite the growing threat and feeling of helplessness. An explosion thundered in the distance. Soldiers expressed hope and joy, thinking the strike on the queen succeeded. On the battlefield, a mixture of fear and fleeting confidence was felt. Typical nerd stood on the tower, carefully monitoring the situation. He came to the conclusion that the queen again avoided the strike and continued to remain an invincible threat to everyone. Ash was sweating with indignation. Lack of information about the queen from the training level didn't allow understanding why she was so hard to eliminate and what strategies might work. These alarming thoughts were interrupted by the gunsmith, who reported cannon damage. It was capable of making only 3 shots, and this posed a difficult task for the commander. The commander gamer faced a difficult goal: eliminate the queen in just 3 shots. Each shot required precision and strategic calculation. Time was extremely limited. At their disposal remained 3 shots, and Darkoot, with his super-seeing abilities, but his eyes were badly damaged after using the 1,000-mile eye, it was unknown if he would withstand 3 more attempts. The fortress wall's strength comforted the Empire's defenders from the spiders, but the monster's approach still caused horror. Tension grew, and every moment could become fatal. Observing what was happening at the fortress walls, Ash compared events he encountered in the game with events of the real battle, trying to find optimal solutions for the team. Typical nerd in the body of character, Ash von Hyde Evershade made decisions quickly and accurately. He gave the order to concentrate all strikes on the monster, minimizing risks for the fortress. The struggle became closer and more dangerous, face to face with the enemy. The fortress walls were damaged, but hadn't collapsed yet. Every action required concentration and instant reaction. Commander Lucas ordered to bring weapons to combat readiness and descend to the first floor. Typical nerd nervously monitored what was happening, assessing the team's capabilities and consequences of each step. Hyde Evershade ordered the gunsmiths to stop panicking and trust the soldiers on the first floor, who had to protect artillery installations and prevent the enemy's breakthrough. Typical nerd claimed their only task was to not let monsters to the artillery and kill the Spider Queen. The entire strategy depended on this, and every mistake could be the last. Darkhoot came to position and again applied his sniper abilities. An explosion thundered in the distance, but they again failed to hit the queen. His hands trembled, but his gaze remained focused. Lucas ordered to load the next projectile and not forget about protecting the Emperor's son. Soldiers carried out the command clearly, understanding that any mistake could cost not only their lives, but also the heirs. Enemy army soldiers began climbing the fortress wall one by one, but they fell halfway, which increased the number of casualties. Each fall echoed dully in the defenders' hearts. Observing what was happening, typical nerd was beside himself with rage and incomprehension of the severity of the situation. He felt helpless, as if the game rules he followed had lost all meaning. Playing this game once, he couldn't imagine that real people lived and died here, that death was real, not virtual. This feeling pressed on him with every minute. The gunsmiths had a fear that the cannon would fail on the fourth shot. Each touch to the mechanism caused trembling, but there was no need to retreat, no time left for deliberation. By that time, there was already a lot of blood and casualties. Everything around was painted crimson, and typical nerds still couldn't find a solution how to get out of this stalemate. Watching the chaos, suddenly, a loud human cry was heard at the fortress walls. Chuck, the prince's loyal soldier, stepped forward, challenging the monsters and simultaneously distracting their attention from the walls. Before Chuck could finish speaking, monsters rushed after him. He ran, leading the crowd of enemies away from the fortress. Every movement required strength and precision. Otherwise, saving the entire group would be impossible. Such a brave decision to take the blow on himself meant one thing. The pickpocket's survival method was activated. Fate depended on Chuck's bravery and ability to keep enemies moving until the last moment. Before typical nerds saw on the monitor a warning about canceling activation due to the character's poor health, Chuck was already surrounded by a pack of spiders. Due to slowness, Ash had to witness the monster's attack on Big Guy Chuck with his own eyes. The spectacle was frightening and shocking for him. Hyde Evershade was enraged by what he saw. He couldn't find words to express hatred toward himself for lost lives due to incorrectly given orders. He almost fell into apathy, realizing the number of casualties through his fault. Disappointment in his own gaming abilities intensified with every minute. Each time he sent people to death without thinking, not pondering the consequences. Now, awareness and desire to correct mistakes came to him. He decided to change the course of events not only in his life, but also in this training level. Understanding mistakes made him reconsider tactics and approach to the game. Besides realizing the wrong approach to orders, typical nerd understood that monsters couldn't be eliminated by screaming, and victory would require acting more decisively and methodically. During the battle, Lucas constantly worried about his comrade's health condition. He was close and asked questions, checking if everything was okay with him. His Highness had no time for answers. He stood face to face with a black spider, understanding that defeating the insect army was possible only by exterminating all enemies. At the moment of realizing the situation, Ash started moving toward danger. He decided to fight spiders in hand-to-hand combat, taking responsibility for the battle's outcome. Suddenly, a loud shout from the gunsmith came from afar. He reported that the fourth projectile was loaded and ready to fire, but Darkhoot wasn't able to shoot. Typical nerd asked Darkhoot again if he was okay and could make a sniper strike, watching the tension already reflected in his wounded eyes. Darkhoot's eyes bled from tension, but the young fighter said his strength would still be enough for the fourth shot, so important for victory, which could turn the tide of battle. The Spider Queen stood so close that the fourth shot hit her right in the head, and it seemed should have blown her to smithereens, threatening the entire enemy army. But when the gunpowder curtain dispersed after the explosion, the Imperial soldiers' army saw the Spider Queen alive and unharmed, which caused shock and confusion among the defenders. The weak nerves of gunsmiths began to fail, and one of them suggested Hyde Evershade surrender, since the cannon was already unsuitable for firing, and there were no other ideas for exterminating the enemy. Typical nerd couldn't accept the thought that this was the end and the battle was lost. Fatigue and hopelessness were reflected on his face. Internal resistance made him hold on to the end. From the fortress's base, desperate voices of soldiers were heard. They shouted that their defense line was broken, and alarm, fear, and despair gripped the defenders' ranks simultaneously. Darkhout's eyes bled with even greater force. He cried from unbearable pain and with annoyance repeated, "That was this really the end?" feeling complete powerlessness before the unfolding catastrophe. One of the gunsmiths, for the 100th time, looked through the telescope and assessed the situation as impossible to resolve the conflict, except for surrendering their positions to the enemy. Despair grew. The smell of defeat mixed with the smell of blood and hung in the air. Typical nerd couldn't shake the feeling that not all was lost yet, that an unforeseen turn of events and a chance to change the outcome was possible. Hyde Evershade turned to the lookout gunsmith, reporting damage to the queen's skin. He knew that if they made the last shot, it would become decisive and determine everyone's fate. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Deafened by the loud sound, typical nerd was falling into the abyss, not hearing how Lucas called him. At this moment, the whole world around plunged into chaos and the noise of destruction. It's unknown how much time passed, but opening his eyes, His Highness saw only ruins and smoke. Lucas bent over him, repeating his name, and hope still lived as a warm fire in his chest. Friends rejoiced at the meeting. Mutual worry for each other's health was heard in their voices. Every movement, every look was filled with anxiety and sincere care for each other. Lucas's breathing was ragged from a serious wound. The wound was bleeding profusely, but the young warrior reminded of an old game where he promised to become emperor and the coolest person, fulfilling the vow. He remembered his promises to become the most impressive knight, believing in His Highness and assuring himself that his lord wouldn't be betrayed. These words were the strength that supported both in the darkness of ruins. Lucas admitted he was mortally wounded and could no longer be useful. His body weakened, words broke off mid-phrase, and he fell in exhaustion, going to the other world, leaving a shadow of his promises. Standing over the lifeless body of his subordinate, Ash spoke farewell words. His heart squeezed, but his mind sought a path forward, thinking how to act further and preserve what was still possible. The silence after the battle was heavy. Ruins burned, smoke swirled, but determination burned in His Highness's eyes. Fate was unpredictable, but he knew he had to act, despite the loss. Typical nerd realized he was under the artillery installation. Thoughts rushed, not forming into a whole picture, like scattered fragments that had lost connection and logic of what was happening. Taking a few steps, His Highness could soberly assess the situation. Darkhoot and the shooters got away with light wounds and temporary shell shock, which in such conditions seemed almost impossible. Von Hyde Evershade felt restrained joy from the outcome, but didn't understand the reasons for their survival. He was troubled by the question of the queen's disappearance and her spiders not leaving him in peace. Suddenly, a weak voice of Kirim came from under the rubble. She called His Highness, as if doubting her own reality and that she managed to get out alive. Kirim looked extremely exhausted. There was no hope in her face. She warned typical nerd that her strength was running out and she could no longer hold the blocked entrance for long. At this fatal moment, Ash acutely felt responsibility for everyone. He decided to act at the limit of possibilities and gave the order to load the last remaining projectile. One of the gunsmiths again pointed out the risk of the cannon itself rupturing. Despite this, His Highness preferred the last shot to doubt and future regret. For maximum efficiency, accurate guidance was required. The stand was destroyed, so the cannon had to be held manually, taking on all the weight and risk. Hyde Evershade understood that without Darkhoot's sniper mastery, they couldn't do without. His 1,000-mile eye remained the only chance, which means it had to be him who shot. However, Darkhoot had lost meaning and faith in success. He didn't perceive what was happening, complaining about fatigue and desire to follow the friend he lost many years ago. Ash understood the guy needed to be shaken up. He raised his voice at Darkhoot, explaining that not everything in life is smooth, and to fix at least part of what happened, he needed to stop whining and pull himself together. Typical nerd finally understood this game didn't obey logic. It went against the rules, which means it was a prototype of life, where every action and mistake was reflected directly, without the right to slack off. His Highness grabbed Darkhoot by the collar and insisted that giving up the fight halfway was extremely disrespectful neither to himself nor to fallen comrades. Resilience, in his opinion, was the only honor. Hyde Evershade, with full seriousness, declared he would fight and develop strategy until his last breath. His screams didn't choose words. They cut through the air, as if demanding attention. For full effect, Ash put a sword to Darkhoot's throat and showed that if he had no desire to fight for life, he could end it right away. The pressure was unbearable. The commander yelled for the guy to stop complaining about the departed friend and become a real warrior. To do this, he just needed to follow orders without unnecessary reasoning and doubts. Typical nerd taught not to look for a reason to live in Darkhoot. It already existed. He was a soldier and needed as an order executor, as a tool that acts without questions, but with full dedication and discipline. The commander's first order after the scolding was to wipe the Spider Queen off the face of the earth. The task was difficult and dangerous, but the only possible one for restoring control. Gradually, the Four Eyes came to his senses. He livened up, realized responsibility, and promised to be useful to his lord and the Empire as a whole, finally feeling his place in the chain of events. The last projectile was loaded, and Ash decided to hold the cannon with his own hands, despite warnings about possible burns. This was a moment of complete determination and personal demonstration of strength. Imperial soldiers came to help the Emperor's son. Together they lifted the cannon they had previously left in battle and carefully moved it to a safer place to use at the decisive moment. The command fire was given, and the projectile flew out of the cannon with a deafening roar, heading exactly toward the target, not deviating from the course and breaking through all obstacles in its path despite the chaos of battle. The projectile flew hundreds of meters, destroying everything in its path, not distinguishing monsters and obstacles, but in the end, blew off the Spider Queen's head, finally changing the course of battle and instilling hope in the defenders' hearts. Hyde Evershade woke up in the hospital feeling pain throughout his body. Every muscle responded with pain, but this also meant he survived and his life was saved despite serious wounds. At the table in the ward in the role of nurse sat Kirem. She quietly told news of the last 3 days that the patient missed while unconscious, carefully watching his reaction and mood. Kirem spoke embarrassedly, not hiding joy internally, fearing that His Highness might not wake up after such a difficult battle and after the shot that almost became the last for him. Typical Nerd looked at Kirem tenderly, surprised by her presence here. He thought she could have died from wounds, but was glad she was nearby and could support him in this difficult moment of recovery. Reinforcements took care of the bodies of the fallen, carefully clearing debris from the battle area so no one would get hurt and operations and recovery could safely continue after the battle. Kirem worried about the injuries and wounds covering the Imperial Son's body. She suggested visiting holy places after discharge so soul and body could receive peace and strengthening after what they'd been through. Full recovery doesn't mean healing all scars and wounds, but that's no reason to worry. The main thing is life is preserved, and ahead is time to recover and regain strength for future deeds. For typical Nerd, who temporarily transformed into Ash von Hyde Evershade, it was hard to observe Kirem's current condition. She sat immobilized in a wheelchair, and this wounded him. The girl with a smile on her lips told about terrible events that limited her capabilities. Every word she shared seemed even more painful for typical Nerd. Kirem reported pleasant news about the survivors. Even those Ash considered dead remained alive. Among them were Lucas, Darkut, herself, and His Highness, which instilled hope. Each of the survivors realized that out of 200 soldiers, only 9 were saved. This, of course, was joyful, but couldn't be considered a manifestation of professionalism. Kirem tried to comfort typical Nerd. He understood that despite transforming into Ash von Hyde Evershade, all the blame for what happened lay on him as a gamer. The girl carefully chose words to convince His Highness that no one knew about the monster attack. Consequently, no one could stop the soldiers so war wouldn't start. Suddenly, the war doors opened with a crash. Excited but joyful Lucas entered. His face shone with hope, and movements showed impatience to learn about the Lord's condition. He approached Ash and began caringly asking about his well-being. Asked if everything was okay, if there was pain, his attention was focused only on the character's health. To shift the topic, typical Nerd turned the conversation to Lucas's condition. It was important for him to know how the wounds had healed, to make sure he was fully recovered after previous events. As proof he was now completely healthy, Lucas straightened to full height, chest forward, legs shoulder-width apart. He demonstrated strength and confidence, feeling completely restored. Lucas, besides worrying about his lord, came not empty-handed. The warrior brought a carefully compiled list of those fallen in battle, which touched the heart of everyone present. His Highness, despite the pain of loss, emphasized that everything possible was done to save the maximum number of people, assessing the bravery and devotion of soldiers. Having received information about the location of the bodies, Ash von Hyde Evershade decided to personally go to the forward positions to examine the bodies of the fallen, demonstrating the commander's care and responsibility. Kirem was against such ill-considered actions, considering them dangerous, but understood the commander must personally see the consequences of battles to make further decisions. Typical Nerd, despite previous gaming involvement, understood what seemed like a game had now become harsh reality, and that the soldiers' deaths lay on his conscience as commander. Without delay, Lucas and His Highness headed to the front. Since Hyde Evershade still couldn't stand firmly on his feet, Lucas took him on his shoulders, carrying him with patience and respect. When the subordinate delivered the commander to the place where the fallen lay, with surprise they noticed a human figure in the distance. It was Darkut, who also saw them. Darkut was glad for the opportunity to meet combat comrades again. All 3 were silent, paying tribute to the fallen, feeling simultaneously the weight of losses and quiet joy of meeting. After a few minutes, questions began. Typical Nerd was interested in Darkut's eye's condition, and the 4 eyes reported that vision was gradually recovering, causing quiet relief among those present. Darkut's embarrassment knew no bounds when Hyde Evershade thanked him for bypassing the battlefield blind and for using magic to heal the wounded. His Highness offered Darkut generous reward, freeing him from further battles. Darkut looked into the distance, assessing the situation, and was silent, accepting the offer. The guy was occupied with the question of who created the monsters and the possibility of getting rid of them, but there was no answer. The sniper turned to face the commander, expressing readiness to continue service. He didn't want to retire, striving to work under His Highness's leadership without hesitation. Typical nerd didn't hide his joy when the young soldier decided to remain in his previous position. The gamer embodied in the character sincerely admired Darkhoot's courage and inner determination. On the battlefield, among corpses, Typical nerd understood the situation was critical. There was no other strategy at the time of making a decision, and the choice had to be made independently. Having taken responsibility for all the dead, Hyde Evershade began to understand the direction of further actions. Each step required utmost concentration and internal discipline. He ordered Lucas to take the bodies to the wasteland and bury them there after the funeral ceremony for the souls, ensuring dignified rest for each fallen one. His Highness planned to arrange a military cemetery on the wasteland and annually, in the second month, honor the memory of the fallen, forming a tradition of honoring heroes. At that moment, Typical nerd was completely himself, realizing he was acting not only for the fallen, but also for atonement for lives taken in what seemed like a harmless game. The gamer, being a game character, gave Lucas a promise that mistakes wouldn't be repeated, and he wouldn't lose, demonstrating determination and desire to correct the past. Having finished business with laying the bodies to rest, His Highness together with subordinates, soldiers, Lucas and Darkhoot returned to the military base, ready for new trials and duties. 3 days after staying at the military base, the commander gave the order to return to the fortress. Typical nerd, having completed training, was at the 5th level and could choose a class. Typical nerd was dissatisfied with his game character and stat distribution. The possibility to choose any status slightly flattered his gamer ego, but doubts didn't leave him. Of all available statuses, Typical nerd could only choose Novice Commander. This meant he would have to go through the entire level, not knowing all the character's capabilities, which caused alarm. Typical nerd sat before the monitor, not daring to make a choice, although the situation required a quick decision. Thoughts were confused, and time continued to move inexorably forward. The gamer's thoughts were interrupted by character Lucas's joyful cry. He reported they had arrived at the place, to the fortress called Crossroads, a defense point and strategic object. The fortress's purpose was simultaneously simple and complex. It held back monster attacks that periodically came from the south, requiring constant readiness and attention. When monsters retreated, soldiers were sent to other tasks. In their place, veteran warriors of different nationalities were recruited to the fortress, replenishing forces and garrison diversity. Over decades, the fortress expanded infrastructure and turned into a city of a million. It received the official name Fortress City, becoming the front line of defense against monsters. However, Typical nerd saw a different name in this place, more accurate in his opinion. He called it Dead City, meaning the recklessness of mercenaries gathering from all over the world. Thoughts about the future and dangers overwhelmed Typical nerd. He understood that choosing a class and novice commander status would determine his further fate on Crossroads front. Entering the city, Typical nerd caught himself thinking that while playing behind the monitor, he didn't suspect how huge and poor this megalopolis was. In Ash's face, he decided to lead this area. The Dead City residents met the commander with dissatisfied faces. Ash understood the reason for their behavior, because people knew the army died due to his ill-considered command. But the commander's sad thoughts changed to jubilation. He foresaw such an attitude of people toward his person and prepared them a surprise, which he hoped would change their opinion of him. In the convoy were carts filled to the brim with magical crystals extracted from dead monsters at the battle site. This supply should have impressed residents and demonstrated strength and generosity. Typical nerd, an experienced gamer, understood that winning any battle depended on local residents' support. He had to establish relationships with them and earn trust before acting further. In his plans, Ash strived to earn a good reputation. He intended to offer city residents generous donations in the form of gold coins, hoping thus to buy the inhabitants' hearts. Thanks to the strategic plan, Typical nerd already knew how and with what over time he would strengthen his influence in this megalopolis, preparing the ground for future leadership and respect from the population. The carriage stopped, Lucas opened the door and reported the path was over. They had arrived home, and Ash carefully got out of the carriage, anticipating what he would see. Before his eyes appeared a beautiful mansion of several floors with its own garden. The building's architecture and well-maintained territories amazed with their scale and elegance, demonstrating the owner's success and prosperity. And then, Typical nerd couldn't contain his admiration. Even in his brightest dreams, he couldn't imagine such a house for himself, especially one obtained in the process of reaching the highest level through the game, which added joy. In the huge mansion, Von Hyde Evershade met a joyful and excited person who called him both Lord and Highness, apologizing for untimely formulations. This emotional weirdo was called Idar, In the game, he was listed as the city manager, he conducted all administrative affairs, and now Typical Nerd was obliged to cooperate with him, being in Evershade's body. Going inside, Von Hyde gave Lucas an order to rest and create comfortable conditions for soldiers' rest so everyone would be ready for upcoming events. Lucas tried to object about his rest, but His Highness stopped him with a hand gesture and gave a command to return to duties tomorrow, showing determination and order. Typical Nerd was glad for Lucas's submissiveness and went up the luxurious staircase after Idar, enjoying the feeling of power and anticipation of future actions. Idar opened the door of one of the rooms. This was a huge bathroom, in the center of which stood a filled jacuzzi. Von Hyde felt fatigue and desire to wash off the smell of war. In anticipation of blissful rest, he told Idar he was free and began taking off his outer clothing, feeling relief after long tense events. Despite the Lord's order, the servant didn't leave, but with an ominous smile continued the conversation, saying he knew about Typical Nerd's completion of training, and introduced himself as the game's creator. Such an unremarkable little servant man rejoiced because he could fool everyone, enjoying his small triumph over masters and players simultaneously. The game creator and city manager Idar's gloating didn't last long and was cut off by a strong blow to the jaw, returning the situation to an unpredictable and tense order. Typical Nerd was beside himself with rage. He couldn't believe that the boar shorty he knew throughout the game as administrator and partner turned out to be the director of Empire Defense. The boar shorty suddenly fell to his knees before the gamer and began apologizing, realizing all the seriousness of his situation and consequences of meeting the person who held the game under control. But Typical Nerd had already entered rush mode and couldn't stop. He dealt the game's creator a series of powerful blows, unleashing accumulated anger and indignation for all years of struggle. With a mouth swollen from beatings, the servant manager barely audibly pronounced apologies to his best gamer in the entire history of the game's existence, realizing helplessness before the fury. Later, when Typical Nerd got tired of beating him, the director raised both hands, showing readiness for peaceful coexistence. Between them, a conversation started about the causes and consequences of what happened. The director explained that in an attempt to achieve the best ending for the world he created, he restarted the game many times, but didn't achieve the desired result, and therefore attracted the best gamer. The creator told that he deliberately turned the world into a game so gamers from all over the world would seek an opportunity to create the perfect ending, which no one had managed to achieve yet. The director of Empire Defense honestly admitted that he himself didn't find the perfect ending, but was able to pass the Hellish Man of Steel level, which required outstanding dexterity and strategy. Believing in the incredible possibilities of a simple mortal gamer, the director decided to implement him into the game from within, providing control and responsibility for the virtual world's development. Hearing this, Typical Nerd again couldn't restrain himself. He shouted offensive words and accusations, pointing out the game owner's mistakes, sending him to training and making him a commander, demonstrating power and superiority. Frightened by the gamer's rage, the director shorty partially acknowledged his mistakes in character placement, but at the same time asked to hear his explanations. While Typical Nerd froze waiting for explanations, the director quickly began to state the essence of all participants' presence here and now, trying not to miss a single detail. The game's creator promised that upon finding the best ending, Typical Nerd would be generously rewarded with wish fulfillment and would return to the familiar world after completing the game. Not believing his own ears, Typical Nerd tried to agree on the prize amount and named the most desired for himself, $1 billion in cash, as if testing the director's reaction. The shorty manager laughed loudly, covering his mouth with his hands, amazed at such a limited sum and modest wish of the player, adding he could give much more and fulfill any dream. While Typical Nerd was confused, choosing exactly what dream to ask to be fulfilled, the director already anticipated what the gamer would demand upon achieving the most correct game ending. The director of Empire Defense claimed that as long as there's a cherished dream in the heart, a person is capable of anything for its fulfillment, turning any trial into an opportunity to prove their strength. This remark provoked a question from the gamer, why a person with such capabilities couldn't himself come up with a universal ending, capable of completing the game perfectly and without outside help. And then, the shorty manager honestly admitted that in the world where he is, his capabilities are limited in relation to fulfilling his own desires, and therefore, he has to seek help from outside. For this reason, many years they waited for a player who would pass all levels to implement him into the common cause and improve the unique game, turning it into something more than just entertainment. Typical Nerd had one main question left: what would happen after death? The answer was logical. Death can't mean anything but the end. The end of everything will come inevitably. The director made a cunning physiognomy, emphasizing that an experienced gamer, which Typical Nerd was, should understand the rules and be ready for anything. A minute later, the shorty reported the possibility of sending the player to Earth, to his real world, if he accepted such an offer. The director put typical nerd before a choice: continue an ordinary life on Earth or stay in the game, risking life for a successful ending. The gamer decided that having passed all levels of the mega difficult game, it was stupid to just return home. He wanted to find a universal ending and use his experience. Typical nerd decisively confirmed readiness to play again, reminding he was doing this for the prize he would ask from the director for winning the game. The professional player's answer pleased the director, and he agreed to help typical nerd in everything, preparing to support him at every stage. Before accepting help, the four-eyed boar received the first order: sell all crystals and bring money, which immediately put the director in difficulty. The director didn't like the idea of selling crystals. He tried to evade the deal, but typical nerd insisted on his rights and repeated the order, demonstrating determination. Having agreed to engage in selling crystals, Idar still felt curiosity where the gamer was going to spend such a huge amount of money, watching the development of events. The morning of the next day brought clear light, and typical nerd observed through the window a yard lined with carts of gold coins. The whole view amazed with its luxury and wealth, which seemed boundless. After breakfast and a short rest, His Highness together with Lucas headed to the Mercenaries Guild, anticipating meeting people who could become part of his future army. A strange commotion reigned in the establishment. Visitors, surrounded by the smell of alcohol, looked with displeasure. The atmosphere was thick and gloomy, every gesture accompanied by quiet grumbling. Ash von Hyde Evershade held himself confidently. His presence instantly attracted everyone's attention, and he clearly made it clear he came to hire people for imperial service. Guests gradually quieted down, watching two stately young men. Hyde Evershade continued to explain with a commanding voice the purposes of his visit, assessing the local contingent. He carefully looked over those present, trying to determine who was capable of becoming a worthy warrior. Strict assessment and hidden disappointment were read in his eyes. Going into the far room, typical nerd noticed a woman at the bar counter. She sat straight, not turning around, and met His Highness's gaze with quiet respect and calm. The woman was over middle age, gray hair gathered in a ponytail, and a black patch covered one eye. There were many medals on her chest. Their shine emphasized high rank and experience. Ash sat next to her, wanting to establish contact with a kindred spirit. The old woman introduced herself as Torona, lightning caster of SR rank, which immediately attracted his attention and respect. He noticed the unusual form of his interlocutor, never seen before. Torona explained she served the Empire and the form was old, but honorable, preserving memory of past battles and merits. The lady of advanced years served as captain of the 2nd Squadron. After retiring, she continued to act as a mercenary, combining experience and toughness in combat operations. She carefully examined the newcomers and noted that cannon fodder was needed by any army. Her tone and audacity instantly impressed everyone present in the hall. Lucas held back irritation, internally boiling from the lady's insolence. Arguing with a military service veteran wasn't his style, and he preferred silence. The lady in uniform told in detail that everyone had heard about the army's losses and that even mercenaries wouldn't go to certain death for large sums. Hyde Evershade approached the matter decisively and suggested everyone name the price for their own life, emphasizing that everyone was already selling it for pennies. Ash took Torona by the arm. His smile was sarcastic and confident. He reported he knew about her service and participation in embezzling funds, which caused tension. Game character, typical nerd, shone with a smile, listing Torona's vicious qualities: corruption, smuggling, and disgraceful dismissal, enjoying the moment. Continuing to pressure the interlocutor, Ash specified if she wasn't ashamed to still wear the uniform, forcing her to feel her own defeat and moral pressure. The lightning caster was a war veteran, dismissed for exceeding authority, but her heroism and unmatched skill weren't questioned even after retirement. The lady asked Hyde Evershade to choose words carefully. He immediately got to the point and asked how much she valued her own life in monetary equivalent. She stated the price of 200,000. Hyde immediately doubled it. When she objected, he emphasized that status and capabilities allowed such expenses without damage to the budget. After a successful deal, typical nerd announced that all who value life above money can calmly disperse and return to familiar duties at home. He added that those wishing to serve for decent reward could come tonight to the Western Wasteland, where recruitment to his army would begin. On the way home, combat comrades, Lucas and Hyde Evershade, decided to stop by the church to pay respect and conduct necessary healing rituals. There, a ritual was performed over His Highness's wound, and a bandage fixed the healing. The process was painless, and those present appreciated the healer's skill. The ritual was conducted by local saint named Meggie, a hidden heroine of R rank, possessing unique abilities in healing and supporting combat teams. After the procedure, Hyde Evershade decided to recruit Meggie, planning to include her in the team in the coming days, considering her skills and potential. The Imperial Army commander brought a large sum to the temple to pay mercenaries, demonstrating seriousness of intentions and need to motivate fighters. Meggie gathered all potential soldiers in the church and delivered a motivating speech on behalf of His Highness Darkut and Lucas, strengthening recruit spirit before service. When evening came, everyone willing to earn on the front lines gathered on the western wasteland, ready for action, discipline, and trials awaiting ahead. On the wasteland, two ceremonies were simultaneously held: initiation into the Empire's army and a funeral with honors for soldiers fallen on the front lines. The atmosphere was solemn and tense. The large-scale event was accompanied by choral singing of the national anthem and prayers for the souls of those who didn't return home, creating a feeling of sacred ritual for all present. Families of the fallen received generous compensation. Rumors of such unprecedented generosity quickly spread throughout the city, attracting public attention to the authorities' care for their soldiers. All events were part of a public presentation for the people, aimed at raising novice mercenaries' fighting spirit and strengthening people's faith in the army and commander's might. Ash von Hyde Evershade came out to the people and made an impression on those gathered. Some saw a great leader in him, others considered him strange, but attention to him was complete and unchanging. Typical nerd, being in the game character's body, spoke about high service risks, mortality, and duty to the homeland, trying to convey to listeners the seriousness of what was happening. He added that the cemetery, where everyone present gathered, would soon expand rapidly, emphasizing the scale of future losses and the seriousness of war. To strengthen the significance of his words, Ash noted that mercenaries' deaths were more important than their inaction, showing that activity and courage were valued above all, even individual people's lives. After a pause, His Highness reported that expenses for funerals and compensation cost him dearly, so he would cherish every soldier, showing care and responsibility for his people. He addressed mercenaries with a request to try to survive, return from war, and see their relatives, emphasizing the importance of personal safety and responsibility for the future. Upon completing the speech, Typical Nerd thought about what ordinary people think and say about him behind his back, but quickly noted that others' opinions couldn't change his internal position and goals. Since the City Lord, Commander, and Typical Nerd were one person, his task remained to make people believe in him, strengthening authority and influence through demonstration of strength and care. Before starting the first level, Typical Nerd activated the teleportation gates, launching the process that opened a portal to the dungeon under the lake, providing access to enemy territory and new opportunities. Now, a free passage appeared to the enemy's rear, allowing reconnaissance and strategic actions planning without direct attack threat, opening new tactical possibilities. In the game, there are levels where the opponent doesn't attack, and the player can look around, study features of monsters and terrain, providing preparation before active combat missions. Typical Nerd often remembered his training, skills, and experience achieved at each stage, understanding that preparation and practice made him stronger and more confident in actions. The game's beginning fascinated Typical Nerd. Anticipation of battles and confidence in passing levels without losing friends created excitement and a feeling of control over what was happening. For Lucas, everything happening was reality, so Typical Nerd in the image of His Highness explained the game rules to him, showing the difference between game possibilities and real events, providing understanding of the situation. Lucas listened attentively, quickly grasped the essence of what was happening. He was especially interested in the possibility of scouting the enemy base before going to the second level, which gave strategic advantage and confidence. Every step in the game was calculated, and preparation and situation analysis allowed Typical Nerd to act thoughtfully, minimizing losses and optimizing actions on the battlefield, creating a feeling of complete power over events. Typical Nerd was surprised by Lucas's behavior. He only recently understood the game rules, but doesn't ask unnecessary questions, only executes his commander's orders, following precise instructions. To the question asked, Lucas answered he was his commander's soldier and had no right to ask questions. His task was only to execute His Highness's orders, not deviating from set goals. Ash had no reason not to trust Lucas. They both teleported to the pier by the lake, where the gloomy atmosphere intensified tension and made them act with caution. Contemplating the terrible pictures of the lake and dungeon, both comrades explored the area and noticed they weren't alone here, and that danger could appear suddenly, without warning. At the lake's bottom, where water suddenly parted in two directions, stood living armor. These were monsters scarier than those Typical Nerd was ready to meet at the first level, and the situation became critical. While His Highness cursed, assessing all the hopelessness of the situation, Lucas analyzed what was happening. He calculated the threat, thought through possible action options, and maintained composure. Ash turned pale, and his faithful soldier Lucas didn't understand why such a strong gamer felt so bad. After all, externally, the situation was controllable, but the Lord's emotions betrayed fear and fatigue. When typical nerd played this game at home in front of the monitor, seeing living armor on the horizon, he reloaded the game. This process was repeated many times, reflecting the uncompromising nature of game mechanics. It was repeated 741 times, because opposing living armor was possible only from the middle of the game, when you managed to acquire necessary statuses, tools, and skills, which made the encounter fatal. From anger and lack of solution, it seemed to the Lord that someone was deliberately preventing him from playing this game again. The situation was going beyond the usual control, and emotions were turning into irritation and despair. Hyde Evershade made the decision to return through the same portal by which he and Lucas entered. They were leaving dangerous territory, but understood the challenges weren't over and new difficulties awaited ahead. With some note of despair, His Highness noted he would try to do everything in his power to play this game again. The strategy required careful planning and resource mobilization. Returning to his estate, the Lord demanded a report from Idar on the condition of military personnel in the city. The game director reported there were 526 men available for deployment to the front, which was insufficient. Such a small number of potential novice soldiers drove Ash crazy. He regretted spending so much money, but expectations didn't meet hopes, and now new methods were needed to achieve victory. Idar added that in this city, all mercenaries had already come to serve the Lord. But this was little, even with those 500 civilians. Von Hyde ordered to hire soldiers from neighboring cities to strengthen the army. Ash ordered Idar to send a telegram to the Empire's capital about the state of emergency and monster activation to prepare central forces and warn of the approaching threat, leaving no time for delay. 4. After thinking a bit, His Highness gave an order to summon to the city all specialists in alchemy, carpentry, and blacksmiths, or to conscript them into the army, to mobilize human and professional resources in an emergency situation. To which the director of Empire Defense answered that if so much labor force was withdrawn from production, the process of cutting magical crystals would stop, and this would create critical failures in army supply and resource management. And then, typical nerd's character, in whose body he was stuck, couldn't restrain his emotions. With a shout repeated the order to Idar right to his face. Stress and tension reached their limit, and there was no alternative to action. Typical nerd understood that the second time he would have to go through this game with even greater difficulty, and decided to take more drastic measures. He went all in and accepted the novice commander status, preparing for trials he previously avoided. Messages began appearing on the screen that the gamer hadn't seen last time. Passing all levels was accompanied by debuffs, reducing stat growth and weapon access by 50%. Ash von Hyde Evershade's situation was changing in seconds. It was changing not for the better, which caused him irritation and internal discomfort. Attack totem, defense totem, super buffer, main command, group synergy. All these were new abilities he hadn't had before and didn't understand how to use them in battle. Later, calming down, the gamer realized the acquired skills were beneficial to him. Now he could award allies with part of the same abilities he possessed himself. The new level contained a class that provided the ability to control all participants simultaneously. This gave Ash special satisfaction and strengthened the feeling of control over the situation. The next morning, the director summoned the commander to the conference hall. There, 4 bound people awaited him, leaders of work groups whose members refused to go to service by order. Among the prisoners were brave men who weren't afraid to directly express their dissatisfaction with the city's situation to the Lord. Their courage was noticeable and commanded respect. Such brazen behavior of subordinates was immediately stopped by Ash von Hyde Evershade. He shouted, shamed and threatened, demonstrating absolute superiority and control over the situation. Having assessed the inequality of statuses, the work group leaders agreed to the proposed conditions. They even brought their apologies to His Highness for the manifested disagreement. As compensation for unauthorized actions against workers and for successful conclusion of negotiations, soldiers were offered 20% of crystals obtained in battle. For such generosity, the commander demanded unquestioning execution of orders from people's leaders, including weapon production, if the situation and strategic goals required it. Money and interest played a role. Workers agreed to conditions without hesitation and hurried to get to work, understanding that the city's further fate depended on this. Time went by, events didn't develop in the best way. 2 days remained until the game started, and living armor, already on the way, should arrive at the city and strengthen defense. Ash gathered his inner circle and explained the seriousness of the situation. Everyone was ready for battle, but the Lord specified he would give step-by-step instructions for further actions. Lucas received an order to improve soldiers' military training skills and train novices from scratch, creating a foundation for a disciplined and prepared team. Kiram didn't stay aside. The Lord gave her a position not requiring physical activity and appointed her head of defensive artifact restoration, providing strategic support. The Lord didn't forget about the former captain of the 2nd Squadron, Torona. He appointed the elderly money lover, a city civil servant for life, securing certain administrative functions to her. In addition, Torona received the position of commander of Special Forces troops. She also obtained a promise to raise salary depending on merits, which motivated her to work effectively. Darkut was armed with a crossbow of ordinary durability, 30 out of 30, without bonuses. But, in the sniper's hands, such a weapon sometimes proved more effective than a monocannon, thanks to his skill in handling it. When His Highness asked why Darkut no longer wore glasses, the sniper explained he used them for respectability, but without them, he could see well enough to execute orders without mistakes. After checking the technical condition of city communications and structures, damage to the fortress's southern wall was discovered. For oversight, the director received a reprimand from Ash. Lack of money and time, and then lack of repair necessity, became justifications for negligence. Ada received a reprimand and order to bring the wall in order without delays. His Highness ordered carpenters to construct in a short time a high and long wooden wall, even if they considered it useless during monster invasion. In the remaining 2 days, preparation for the game's start and monster invasion went lively and productively. Such a pace of work greatly pleased the Lord and raised fighting spirit. Time flew quickly, and only half an hour remained until the battle started. Lookouts noticed enemy activity on the horizon and the approach of potential threat to the fortress. A horde of living armor rapidly led the offensive and with each minute approached the walls. Tension in the fortress intensified with each second. The Imperial Army commander convinced everyone that such a strong army would easily exterminate the enemy, although he internally doubted the success of the upcoming battle. He shouted optimistic slogans, was proud of soldiers' physical training and abundance of newest weapons, although these facts were greatly exaggerated to raise spirits. Ash's main task was that the army trust the Lord and unquestioningly obey his orders at critical moments of battle and strategic actions. When everyone hoped in him, Ash in turn counted on each one individually. To pass the first level, he needed Torona's help, the Magic Master. The expensive fighter in a skirt entered battle. Lightning Mage Torona together with her students, ready to apply their skills and strategic abilities against enemies. The predictability of monsters' actions was to Torona's advantage. She directed them into a trap and blinded them with an electric discharge to disperse the enemy's formation discipline. The mage's first skill scattered marks on enemy targets, and the second directed them for destruction. Hyde Evershade observed the battle, admiring Torona's mastery. Despite successfully repelling the attack, Torona's unit received an order to retreat. The enemy's numbers significantly exceeded the defenders' numbers. Living armor reached the fortress walls, but besides familiar structures, they ran into wooden shields, which created congestion and slowed the army's advance. When the legion at the fortress's foot looked for a way out of encirclement, Ash gave the command to open fire on the enemy cluster, to inflict maximum damage with minimal losses. From all cannons of the Imperial Army, projectiles flew out and fell on enemies' heads in deadly fiery rain, piercing armor and creating chaos in advancing ranks. Despite the success of the first operation, everyone understood this was only part of the battle, and new attacks awaited ahead, requiring concentration and precise troop interaction. At this stage, Kirem's help was needed. By the Lord's order, she activated the gravitational field artifact to slow enemies' movement and facilitate counterattack. A minute later, Ash ordered Lucas to bring ballistas to combat readiness. Lucas immediately gave orders to soldiers and monitored preparation for the next volley. It was indicated to aim at living armor's chest. Crossfire of artifacts and ballistics dealt crushing blows, destroying enemy ranks and leaving no chance for resistance. When troops began bypass to the right of the wall, Hyde Evershade remained in position, observing the battle from above. Torona threw discharges at advancing ones, destroying each one. Darkut received an order to exterminate all uninvited guests advancing from the fortress's left side. His shots hit the target with amazing precision, bringing tangible effect. The 1,000-mile eye functioned again, providing accurate data for hitting the enemy. Darkut hit targets with enviable accuracy, increasing defense effectiveness. Crossfire at the fortress's foot caused massive destruction. The opponent lost ranks and fighting spirit, notwithstanding the pressure created by organized attack. Observing his soldiers' dedication, typical nerd felt joy. Work results were impressive, and efficiency achieved in a short time, causing pride in the fighters. However, anticipation of victory didn't last long. Among living armor appeared their boss, disrupting the game's order, appearing ahead of schedule, and instantly changing the situation on the field. Even experienced soldiers came to horror, noticing the boss, For all participants, this game turned into cruel reality, where every mistake could cost a life. The monster's appearance caused fear not only in people, but also in horses. The boss's appearance sharply reduced fortress defense, forcing soldiers to seek new survival strategies. Analyzing the situation's deterioration, Ash understood it was time to retreat. The situation was rapidly getting out of control, requiring instant decisions to save troops. Confusion didn't last long. Ash gave an order to protect Torona, considering her the most powerful weapon of flesh and blood, capable of changing the course of battle at the right moment. Artillerymen, gripped by fear before the boss, were losing their minds. Fire activity decreased, but Ash managed by order to restore shelling to hold positions. Torona's steadfastness inspired her subordinates. They fought desperately, fighting with all their might, despite fear, fatigue, and superior enemy forces. Nevertheless, the first defense line was lost. Living armor broke through forward, creating a threat for the fortress's remaining defenders and threatening further advance. Before the former captain of the 2nd Squadron stood living armor, their smell of mold and rust irritated and weakened the elderly lady's fighting spirit, reducing magic attack effectiveness. She felt weakness. Lightning almost brought no effect. It seemed the situation was hopeless, for the first time causing her desire to surrender or cry from helplessness. Unexpectedly, a young man with a spear appeared nearby. He didn't flinch from fear and supported the experienced lady, advising to continue attacking with magic, providing temporary advantage. The mercenary cleared space, scattering living armor, creating protection for Torona. However, after some time, he was struck by monsters, leaving allies without support. Standing over the fallen mercenary, Torona regretted delaying mana for a powerful shot. The opportunity to change the battle's outcome was slipping away with each moment, reducing chances for victory. Although the advice was already late, Torona still gave it. She noted the mercenary should have been kept away from mages and better avoid army service, despite all rules and laws of war. Standing face to face with monsters, Torona felt powerlessness and inevitability of death. Her heart pounded, body tensed, fear bound every movement. It seemed there was no way out. Suddenly, a sound was heard, warning of someone else's presence. It was Lucas, who descended into the death zone from the fortress wall, where his commander's unbending skill was activated. Lucas's skill gave immunity against madness and spread to all allies. Empire soldiers, thanks to this, lost fear, gaining strength and confidence in the face of danger. Lucas himself directed a rescue squad to help Torona by the commander's order. The commander at this time was engaged in organizing soldiers and resuming fire damage to the enemy to hold positions. Despite her age, Torona maintained physical form and nimbly jumped on the horse Lucas brought. They raced away from monsters, feeling how danger gradually retreated. Lucas regretted on the go that he didn't manage to come earlier. He felt guilt and responsibility for Torona, having to cope with the threat alone while he was unavailable. Thanks to the new status, Ash managed to restore control over the death zone. Lucas and Torona returned to the fortress safe and sound, avoiding death and serious injuries. This success cost typical nerd 4 soldiers and a series of destructions. He didn't account for panic among people and animals, which led to undesirable consequences for fortress defense. The death zone didn't function perfectly. Around remained fire, screams, and signs of approaching enemy regiment, creating a tense atmosphere and threat for remaining defenders. Despite unexpected events, the Lord understood he controlled the situation. He maintained cold calculation, managing events, rather than allowing circumstances to manage him. Lucas carefully watched Torona, trying to maintain politeness, although internally experiencing irritation. The old soldier, in a skirt, pointed out the commander's mistakes and regretted her weakness. The enemy destroyed the death zone. Artillerymen with Darkhoot received an order to cease shelling, which caused alarm among defenders. Imperial soldiers began preparing for a new threat, assessing enemy forces. The enemy's approach intensified fears that living armor could overcome fortress walls. Defenders carefully watched every movement of monsters, trying to foresee their maneuvers. In case of close combat, a squad was brought to combat readiness, where physical strength determined the outcome. Soldiers checked weapons and developed tactics, preparing for fierce fight. Meanwhile, living armor began ascending fort walls. Above them already met the prepared Empire's army, ready to meet the opponent and repel the attack. As soon as enemy heads appeared on the horizon, artillerymen with mercenaries began dropping technical garbage, concrete chunks, rebar, and other heavy objects on them. Most of the monsters lost consciousness and flew down, receiving mortal wounds. The rest continued to climb, ignoring pain, and threateningly advanced toward fortress defenders. The Lord didn't lose hope for victory, feverishly sought a solution through the game's internal content. Eventually, the necessary group reorganization was found, which could change the battle's course. The situation with fortress defense worsened, hand-to-hand combat began. Soldiers fought with last strength, trying to hold positions and not let the opponent capture strategic points. Lucas gave a command not to leave positions. The only chance to survive in this fight for all defenders was not to surrender and continue fighting to the end. By this moment, Kirim received from Ash an order to bring the speed artifact to activation mode. This accelerated allies' actions by 5%, which was enough to control monsters. At this stage, an accumulative skill was connected to Lucas, and his strength grew with each killed enemy. New capabilities increased effectiveness, but the opponent remained dangerous and cruel. Despite connecting abilities, Von Hyde Evershade understood he had more losses than the enemy. The Emperor's army suffered defeat, and front lines gradually retreated, unable to contain the onslaught. Having assessed the worsening situation, Darkut and Torona returned to the front, and the Lord feverishly searched for functions in the game system capable of reducing losses and decreasing enemy numbers. The solution came through Kirem. She had to use all the power of her magic. The girl felt fatigue and complained about mana weakening, but Ash's promise to raise salary motivated her. Lucas hacked monsters with his sword, and Kirem burned them with magical flame. Their joint actions produced an impressive effect, leaving behind fiery and bloody traces of destruction. To the foot of the ancient fortress of Dead City fell charred bodies of monsters, blocking the main entrance. Despite this, rejoicing was premature. The threat remained too close. The commander addressed the immediate circle and reminded that the enemy couldn't be considered weakened. Opponents maintained combat capability, and their strength in the person of the boss remained a significant threat. When the boss's approach was noticed, the commander-in-chief gave the order to artillerymen not to stop fire. Each volley was calculated to slow the target and create safe distance for troops. Allies focused on coordinated actions. Kirem's magic, Lucas's combat skills, and artillery fire created powerful pressure on the enemy, gradually changing the battle's course in their favor. The time came for Kirem to activate the magic multiplier. The third R-rank artifact flared up, amplifying the energy flow, and its power instantly transferred to Torona, changing the battle's balance. Torona rushed into the very epicenter of battle. She appeared not empty-handed to humanity's most dangerous enemy, carrying with her a clot of pure electrical energy. Darkut received a no less fateful mission. Using the Soul Core, he fired from the combat installation directly at the target, leaving no doubt about the hit's accuracy. Joy from successful attack didn't last long. Typical Nerd noticed the enemy was only partially hit, and a magical sword appeared in the boss's hand. If the boss touched the city fortress wall with this sword, the entire structure would collapse, burying defenders and depriving the city of the last frontier. The commander-in-chief's nerves were finally shattered. In the midst of confrontation, he began shouting orders even louder, trying to maintain control over the situation. When the living armor boss raised his sword, intending to strike the wall, Torona, without delay, directed her lightning directly at the target. The spectacle was mesmerizing. The long-standing and most powerful enemy burned, whose existence for many years inspired fear and hopelessness. In one moment, Ash realized mortal danger. The thought of escape flashed too late, and he didn't manage to transmit the order. Several meters of freefall ended unexpectedly successfully. Lucas and the Lord remained whole and unharmed, escaping from the abyss. The wall of the city's main structure still bore traces of the strike. The fortress was partially destroyed, stone crumbled, reminding of victory's price and how close ruin was. The Ghost Knight, boss of living armor, no longer existed. The level was past. However, typical Nerd again and again replayed in memory the moment of the monster's final defeat. Victory over monsters came to the squad with difficulty. It cost heavy losses, but remained long-awaited, hard-won, and therefore especially significant for each surviving fighter. Imperial Army soldiers examined the battle's consequences and couldn't fully realize how they managed to surpass the enemy considered the most powerful of the known. The battle's tension slowly left faces, conversations, and everyday life of townspeople. They relearned to rejoice in simple things and carefully built plans for the future. A victory celebration was arranged in the city with dances, contests, treats, and abundance of drinks. His Highness paid for all expenses, wanting to thank people for steadfastness. Music poured from all sides, adults and children's laughter sounded, streets transformed beyond recognition, and almost no noticeable traces remained of recent horrors. Unlike townspeople, His Majesty kept to the side, didn't eat or drink, looked tired and simultaneously happy, which caused Lucas alarm. Lucas carefully, choosing words, tried to return his commander to life without war, remind of peace and quiet. However, these attempts were difficult for him. Even through a smile and awareness of the nightmare's end, the Lord continued to grieve over losses that occurred through his fault, and this shadow didn't allow him to celebrate. Then out of nowhere appeared the director of Empire Defense, holding a plate of vegetables. He believed that after mourning the fallen, time came to celebrate victory and change mourning for noisy merriment. Having lost the remains of fear, Idar began forcibly feeding Ash vegetables. Townspeople were indignant, raised a cry, and demanded that His Highness be served meat and strong alcohol. A bit later, Kirem approached the tables in a wheelchair. She was in strong alcoholic intoxication, grabbed the commander by the hands, and persistently asked for retirement. Soon, the girl's friends appeared and took her away from the celebration. Ash didn't know if she would continue the fun or go to sleep, but was sure he wouldn't accept her retirement. Sitting at the festive table with Darkut, the Lord, with surprise, noticed he was already heavily drunk. Guessing who exactly got him drunk wasn't difficult for him. Nearby settled the soldier's combat girlfriend in a skirt, one-eyed old woman Torona. She assured that Darkut was obliged to learn to drink and smoke. After all, he's a mercenary, not a child. His Highness, not wanting to listen to the spoiled old woman's drunken speeches, led Darkut away from the noisy company and tried to save him from further humiliation. Walking next to Ash, Darkut confessed that in solitude, he still remembered his dead friend's face and couldn't get rid of this image even after time. With a slurred tongue, the guy added that next to the commander, he forgot about his sorrows and fears. Not finishing the last thought, he finally fell asleep on the go. Typical nerd knew perfectly well the reason for what was happening and understood it was all about his skill. However, he had no right to spread this aloud and initiate the surrounding into the secret. Deep night had already come, and Dead City residents didn't calm down. They celebrated victory over monsters, drank, ate, danced, praised their lord, Third Prince Ash von Hyde Evershade. Despite the fact that Ash was wasted and had already gone to rest in his room, Typical Nerd was bursting with curiosity, and he looked at what awaited him at the maximum SSR rank level. It turned out to be game combat gloves. Damage, 0.7. Durability, 7 out of 7. The model looks cool, but is an absolutely useless item for the player, although it's better than nothing. The next day, all yesterday's heroes were hungover. Heads ached, they felt nauseous. But right after a light breakfast, they went to assess the destruction. During analysis, it turned out that updating the fortress wall would require at least 2 weeks, and 9 days remained until the next level. Von Hyde ordered to mobilize everyone. Understanding there was no time for normal preparation for the new offensive, Typical Nerd in the Lord's face went under the lake with elite squad members to get ahead of monsters. Ash called the trip under the lake an ordinary expedition, so as not to stir a panic among his best soldiers in advance. They took canned food, potions, and camping supplies. They left early in the morning. Everyone walked silently, and only the one-eyed old woman asked the commander inappropriate questions. Where are we going? Did they take lanterns and torches? How many days is this assignment calculated for? Approaching the portal, Leader Ash explained to those here for the first time that beyond this portal, under the lake, were monsters. All present needed to pass through it. The meaning of this trip was to find out the reasons why monsters from time to time attack the military base fortress, subjecting Dead City residents to death. So, let's fly, guys. Destination is the lakeshore, lair of monsters of different breeds and subspecies. Having arrived at the place, the old woman lit her 5th cigarette that morning and told she was here 20 years ago. There was an assignment to drain water from the lake and fill it with mud. The former captain of the 2nd Squadron story greatly frightened Kirem and slightly Darkut, but they needed to go deeper into the kingdom under the lake and pass the checkpoint. Typical Nerd didn't read all the rules of this trial, press the button. After all, being a gamer, not one of the characters, he passed this game 741 times. He knew all the rules by heart. Tons. Making their way through thick darkness, all expedition participants gathered in one place. Lucas lit torches and the outline of the monster's home appeared before their eyes. A figure in a black cloak and hood was approaching the guests. The Lord calmed his people, warning that this mysterious person wasn't their enemy. This must be an NPC guide, Typical Nerd thought, but when the person approached, the gamer understood he was meeting this character for the first time. To pass further, Evershade Third Prince explained to the guide the reason for the visit. Destruction of the monster source, because of which the outer world suffered. The one who met them advised to return back as soon as possible, since they weren't the first such heroes here who thought they could exterminate monsters. To which Ash answered that her hints about death in unequal battle wouldn't stop him, so she shouldn't even try, and if she had nothing more to say, let her vanish from sight. But the lady in black, out of curiosity, volunteered to help the uninvited guests. Since the main entrance to the monster city was closed, she wanted to show another entrance. When the Lord asked her name, she answered she didn't remember her name. He named her Velra. After an hour of walking in an unknown direction following stranger Velra, Lucas was indignant, fearing a trap. But the commander ordered him to stop panicking, shut up, and go further. The girl in black brought everyone to the sewage and said this was the only way to get into the city. Thus, through the dried drain, His Imperial Highness and his soldiers passed the first checkpoint. In this safe zone, where monsters of the underwater city couldn't get, Velra preferred to leave, leaving the new victims alone, but at the same time, gave advice: never turn off the light. Now, the Lord and his subjects remained alone face to face with impenetrable darkness. About darkness, it should be clarified. It was so dark that even Sniper Darkhoot saw nothing. Typical nerd doesn't remember Velra in all previously past levels, but now, saying goodbye to her, Ash knew for sure they would definitely meet, only in what capacity. Having prepared for battle, the weapons they had with them, the third prince's small army moved from the checkpoint into the unknown to them depth of a long corridor. When the corridor ended, doors became visible. In one of the rooms the guys entered, they were met by the first monster, a giant-sized rat with red eyes. Lucas was the first to rush into battle, not noticing there were many rats in this room. The main weakness of these rodents were eyes and neck. Other body parts were impenetrable. Torona and Kirem were given an order to spend their magical abilities only on those with whom Darkhoot, Ash, and Lucas didn't manage to deal. After a few minutes, the battle of man with rodent was completed with Rat's defeat. Standing knee-deep in their corpses, Von Hyde was satisfied with the cohesive work. And then suddenly, Typical Nerd remembered that at this game level, there should be 14 individuals. And they counted 13 corpses. Where's one more scumbag? At this moment, a rustle and loud squeak was heard from the commander's back. A rat the size of Kirem jumped at the Lord's shoulder level, attacking the human. The jump's height made the commander's task easier. His fist, in a fraction of a second, flew between the monster's eyes. Do rats have concussions? Since it was a baby, its skull hadn't hardened yet. But it wasn't why a fist punch to the crown was deadly for the rodent, but thanks to the Lord's special gloves. Despite friendly relations with all game characters, Typical Nerd decided not to reveal all his capabilities to them. He said it was the prince's special strike. Room number 2 was empty, but only at first glance. When Darkhoot looked closer, he saw a chest in the far corner. Everyone should have been careful, but at this stage, Gold Fever was activated and its victim was this damn one-eyed old hag Torona. She rushed to the chest, opened it. There were treasures inside. They went further. Room number 3 pleased the company of fearless warriors with a new brood of baby rats. Experienced warriors dealt with them in a minute and a half. Further was the boss's room. Its door was powerful, but not locked. They entered with caution, since it reeked heavily of blood from there. Inside this room, there were very many already dead rats. They didn't have to kill anyone. But in the far corner of the room sat a giant monster and spoke in a human voice. He hissed through his teeth, calling them two-legged devils, all climb and climb to him endlessly. The rat angrily flashed fiery eyes. How many had he already exterminated, and still there was no end to them? Looking at what was happening, Typical Nerd understood he was at the 15th level, and the Ratman himself was talking to him, the head of the sewage service. The Imperial Highness gave a loud command. "Girls, your turn!" And at this minute, Kirem rolled forward on her wheelchair. Torona stood behind her. It smelled of fried rat meat. Literally walking over corpses, at the end of the room, Ash noticed another chest. He ordered Lucas to hold the inadequate Torona and himself opened the box. In the chest turned out to be a long steel sword with durability 20/25, with 25% damage. Such stuff wasn't interesting to the former captain of the 2nd Squadron, so she was quickly released. Also, in that chest was a summoning scroll. They also took it and moved on. And further began some gloomy, narrow nooks of the city, personifying magical civilization. This was the kingdom under the lake. Having passed several streets in a row, the Lord's team didn't meet a single animal or a single person. In houses, even nowhere flickered light. Ash gave a command to return. Despite physical and emotional fatigue, 2 young ladies, Torona and Kirem, decided to drink something stronger. The guys dispersed to their bedrooms to rest. On the way to the rooms, Ash told Lucas that the next attack on the fortress would be carried out by those monsters from the lake they didn't manage to exterminate this time. The next morning, the city manager, game creator, and director of Empire Defense, Adar, reported to his lord that the reinforcements they so needed wouldn't come. This news threw off track not only Von Hyde, but also Typical Nerd. He didn't remember such difficulties in this game, playing it previous times. Not finding a solution alone, Ash lost it, and, shaking the director's face, demanded from him immediate problem solution. It seems that's exactly what he was waiting for. 2 minutes later, Idar prepared a crew and together with Lucas and the Lord, went to the Prince of Borders, the manager of a strategically important border region. This man was once a military commander, responsible for the life and freedom of citizens inhabiting the entire district. Having arrived at Fort Crossroad, 3 warriors were amazed by the grandeur and protection of this huge structure of high walls. Powerful guns' muzzles looked at the road. Imperial Highness Ash von Hyde Evershade, Prince 3 recently recognized Lord, was anxious before meeting with his predecessor. The gloomy atmosphere of the princely house and possessions around brought Ash bad thoughts about the Prince of Borders. And yes, they were met by a rather indecent, not young person. Instead of "Greetings, dear guests," the old man yelled at the top of his lungs 3-story curses and threateningly waved a bottle of Molotov cocktail. Seeing Idar, the old man calmed down a bit and seemed even to become kinder, but his appearance still didn't inspire von Hyde with trust, although, if they had come, it was worth talking. Imperial Highness Ash von Hyde Evershade Prince 3 recently recognized Lord understood he came here with a request, and this meant he needed to be polite. But the Prince of Borders asked the Lord to disappear from his radar and not get in the way of his cataract. Such treatment awakened in Ash that very tyrant. Evershade also threw the old man several lines without loading. But this didn't help. The old man clearly had his tongue disconnected from his brain. The guys left, but promised to return. Of course, it was possible to beat up this drunk and even threaten and even negotiate. But this daddy had a daughter, Nalin, with super abilities. She's important. This madam, together with loyal soldiers of her dad, can really help the Lord's army. Therefore, it was necessary to find a way to negotiate with this alcohol dependent. And finally, the prince came up with a holiday without reason. Having loaded a cart with bottles of elite alcohol, he went to meet with this local entrance sommelier. The Lord, not losing dignity, wiped just in case the glasses offered by the old man, and the Prince of Borders, glancing over the booze, called on the holy squirrel to protect him. Before this walking alcohol meter made him drink together, Ash opened his mouth to ask for military help, but the old man said, "Either drink or get out of here." Von Hyde lied that he would like not only to drink, but also to have some snacks. Then the old man brought dried fruits from his garden. To his young interlocutor, Charon showed from the estate window his huge, luxurious fruit garden. After this, the old man fell silent for a while and seemed even to become sad. He explained to the young lord that his garden began to disappear, and the reason for this was the monster invasion. The lord caught sadness in the old man's eyes and suggested that perhaps it was necessary to deal with these creatures, and added his request to give him his soldiers for this. To which the old man, finishing his 27th glass of elite drink, answered that all his soldiers had long retired and there was no army, and the Lord himself should get out of here. His Imperial Highness left the Prince of Borders' estate with nothing, but the prince became interested in this old man's past, in why he had to renounce the title. As a trophy, from Charon's house, Ash took one dried fruit. It was bitter to taste, almost unsuitable for consumption. Looking sadly into the distance, the commander ordered Lucas to return to Crossroads and restore the wall. Monsters wouldn't wait. They'd come on time. The 5th day of fortress wall restoration was underway. Right to the work site for builders, architects, and installers was brought food and drinks. Thanks to sufficient number of workers and material, 2 days remained until complete wall restoration. The time came to use the magical scroll. Thanks to this scroll, Von Hyde received another player skill, which is called Summoning Magic. In addition to the skill, typical nerd was given an additional game item, R-rank Mana Core. His Imperial Highness sincerely believed that with this item, he would manage to win the upcoming battle, protect the tunnel and fortress. By the prince's order, in a short time using magical architecture technology by local masters, a core launcher was created. Having seen the new miracle of technology, His Imperial Highness brought gratitude to all who honestly work for the Empire's benefit, and ordered to continue strengthening the defense line. The same day in the forge, a metal armor was made, just right for Lucas. The fair-haired handsome guy tried on new equipment. The armor suited him. Lucas and Ash went to the fort's western part. There, a ceremony of burial of soldiers fallen in battle was taking place. Warriors were seen off with salute volleys. Toward the end of the burial ceremony, the Prince of Borders, Charon, came to the military cemetery. He began sarcastically listing all the expenses for such ceremonies. The prince asked the old man the reason for his visit. And the Prince of Borders, who by the way seemed to be sober, answered he spoke with his former soldiers and they wanted to fight again. Charon transferred his army under the command of the third prince, although he didn't place special hopes on his aged warriors. But the young lord was grateful even for this. The old man wasn't one of sentimental personalities, and, to the prince's words that it was time for him to stop drinking so much, sent him to the well-known address. 2 days later, everything was ready for Dead City's defense. Shells, soldiers, guns, everything prepared for battle. Even the fortress wall was updated. The barricade with Death Zone was also ready to meet new war victims. It was installed at the foot of Crossroads, the military base fortress where training was conducted. The day after battle preparation, early in the morning, monsters set out on the road. They walked with quick steps and jumps, growled, howled. His Imperial Highness Ash von Hyde Evershade, 3rd Prince, came out to the watchtower and saw the enemies approach. 10 minutes remained until the battle started. Suddenly there, in the distance, a human silhouette appeared. The figure slowly approached, but making out the face was difficult. The Lord showed Lucas the person walking in the distance, but neither the young soldier nor sniper, Darkhoot, saw anyone there. The 3rd Prince was more than sure there was a person in the distance, but why could no one see him? Typical nerd thought it might be a glitch in the game. Suddenly, the ground trembled underfoot. This meant monsters were almost at arm's length. Ash understood he needed to maintain calm. Seeing the approach of 4-legged monsters, the Imperial Army commander ordered his soldiers to urgently prepare guns for battle, not losing a second. Standing on the watchtower, His Imperial Highness Ash von Hyde Evershade, 3rd Prince, recently recognized Lord, watched as projectiles hit right on target, tearing apart enemies. Stupid giant rats, as if on command, entered the death zone and died there from fire directed at them. The spectacle was terrible and not at all for the faint-hearted. Despite very accurate barrage battle conduct, rats were characterized by incredible survivability. They stubbornly climbed up wooden shields, paying no attention to losses. The thing was that piles of corpses of their brethren served all survivors as a trampoline. Thus, these toothy creatures easily overcame the death zone and got closer and closer. This rat solidarity wasn't in the newly minted Lord's plans. He watched the feverish actions of surviving rats and feverishly came up with Plan B. The commander ordered gunsmiths to disperse weapons to expand the damage zone. Thus, they tried to destroy as many creatures as possible and contain their onslaught. Despite the fact that the death barricade was far from the fortress's foot, these tailed creatures very quickly overcame this distance, as if not feeling fatigue. How could you screw up so badly and not calculate the rat's speed and survivability? Typical nerd reasoned, sitting at his gaming laptop monitor and nervously clenching his fingers. But at this moment, gunsmiths rolled out the core launcher onto the fortress's observation deck. It was this powerful machine that proved to everyone that hopeless situations don't exist. The projectile fell exactly on target, and hundreds of rat corpses scattered for hundreds of meters. Ash watched this salute of rat skins with cold pride, not taking his eyes away for a second. Despite the power and effectiveness of the newest weapon, it couldn't cover the entire battlefield with strikes. In addition, the core launcher needed constant reloading, which made defense vulnerable. Not descending from the watchtower, von Hyde could more accurately assess the battlefield situation. From there, it was visible that the rat onslaught wasn't getting weaker, and pressure only grew. The defense line was rapidly shrinking. This meant only one thing: close combat wasn't far off, and with it would inevitably come an increase in casualties among soldiers and border defenders. Suddenly, the young prince's heavy thoughts were interrupted by a deafening projectile explosion. A whole pack of rats rose into the air. This reality hit him on the head, making him shudder. Turning toward the gunsmiths, Ash saw standing next to him the Prince of Borders, Old Man Karen. His calm gaze seemed confident even in this chaos and thunder of battle. The former manager's army veterans brought more benefit in this battle than expected. They commanded correctly, gave orders clearly, and thought strategically, not succumbing to panic. The 3rd Prince looked with admiration at these battle-hardened fighters of the old school. But still their military endurance, experience, and time-hardened fighting spirit were visible. Meanwhile, Lucas, appointed responsible for the front line, gave commands to left front soldiers. Everything happened strictly according to defense strategy, without unnecessary movements and fuss. Typical nerd's knowledge of military terminology, of course, limped badly, but his character, the Lord and Helper Lucas, coped excellently with tasks set by the gamer. Tongues, tails, ears, paws, all this separately. That's how rats looked after Sniper Darkhoot's accurate shots. The guy didn't part with his crossbow. Von Hyde looked tenderly at this big-eyed youth concentrated on combat operations, noting to himself that the guy felt excellent in battle. Kiram alone was worth it. Her responsibility lay in correct and timely use of artifacts in this battle, and she coped excellently with the task. Ash came to look at what the one-eyed soldier in a skirt, Torona, was doing, and Torona was almost in Queens. This madam was resting in the literal sense of the word. The prince would have liked to command her, drop and give me push-ups, but with women, that's not accepted, especially if she's a mage without whom you can't do without in this battle. Without applying a drop of effort, this former captain of the 2nd Squadron was already drinking not her first shot for victory in a battle whose outcome was still unknown. Thanks to coordinated interaction of people and guns, fortress defense was going excellently, except for the fact that rat scum was getting closer and closer to Crossroads walls. Suddenly, the sky was illuminated by a bright flash that no one except Von Hyde noticed. In that flash of light, a human silhouette was clearly visible. Typical nerd became interested in who this fearless one was, who wasn't afraid to so boldly tease his imagination. The map showed enemy NPC invasion. Ash knew the city manager, game creator, director of Empire Defense. Idar was involved in this, but getting to him now was impossible. He doesn't participate in battles. Now, Darkut also saw the approaching human figure. He looked like a wandering artist. Von Hyde ordered to kill him. But the young warrior, chaplain, and fighter for justice, for the first time, couldn't agree with the commander's order. After all, the one approaching them looked like a vagrant. But typical nerd already remembered this character from his past games. This wandering artist just has to play the flute and everyone's screwed. Ash repeated his order. Destroy the target! But while the commander and Imperial Army soldier were figuring out the order's expediency, the approaching one completed the task assigned to him. As soon as magical music sounded, whose sounds spread throughout the region, rats as if bewitched raised their snouts up and caught every note. 2 seconds later, all this rat brotherhood rushed toward the fortress walls with even greater speed. And it seemed... No, it didn't seem. But it was so. No bullet could hit them. His Imperial Highness ordered ballistas to deliver blow after blow. Gunsmiths barely managed to reload guns, but still coped well with their task. Observing what was happening, the commander understood rats were commanded by some experienced strategist. They rushed to the fortress wall, gnawed and clawed stone with claws, forming cracks. Despite undeniable devotion to his commander and Imperial Army, Darkut again didn't shoot from the crossbow at that jester with the flute. Then Ash addressed Torona, already quite drunk after a long rest, and ordered her to fire in the direction of the greatest concentration of rodents. Kirem also received an order to bring fire artifacts to battle. This girl, despite limited capabilities, confidently and accurately coped with any orders. Thus, united, 2 mages, Kirem and Torona, provided their prince with timely fire support. The shish kebab of rats turned out noble and spectacular. Ash stood on the fortress's observation deck and couldn't get enough of the spectacle when lightning and fire merged into one. This reminded typical nerd of New Year fireworks. But the young warrior's joy was interrupted by a loud wheezing voice from the offensive side. It was a rat man, yelling at Ash that he was going to bite him in the side. This brought typical nerd into a state of increased heartbeat and butt clenching. He made his character Evershade drive everyone into a decisive attack. But there were many rat men this time, and they turned out significantly bigger than those they happened to meet earlier under the Dark Lake. Guns fired from all barrels, not stopping fire for a second, but this didn't stop attackers too much, and the enemy wave continued moving forward. Torona, already without orders, understood it was time to pour mana. His Highness noticed that with a drunk head, this woman fought with full dedication. Kirem tried to dodge executing the order to bring fire artifacts into action, explaining this by the fact they hadn't completely cooled down yet. But Ash repeated the order, and the girl, gathering all her power, dealt a crushing blow to the target. Everything around was engulfed in fire and lightning. Now came Lucas's turn to enter direct battle. He forcefully launched that long steel sword with durability, 20/25, with 25% damage, which they found under the lake. Darkut at this time struck the victim with 100 released arrows. The target was hit. Moreover, it suffered for a long time, dying from poison with which arrows were treated. Dying, the rat man in a human voice sent everyone to hell, cursed and promised revenge. Although, how can a dead one take revenge? None of the survivors bothered to figure out. Observing what was happening from cover, the Prince of Borders, Karen made a discovery for himself. Since the time when he was Lord, much had changed. Enemies had hierarchy and strategy. Looking at the prince, the old man now didn't believe rumors that this was a drunkard, reveler, and brawler. Karen understood the young generation fought more recklessly. Karen would like to help Ash in this battle, but he had his own life. The old man, unlike the kid, had something to lose, the garden and memory of his beloved. He returned home. Ash ordered rifle squads and artillery to stay in place and not stop fire. Others were given an order to accept close combat. To the former captain of the 2nd Squadron, Von Hyde gave complete freedom of action, after which this lover of drinks and cigarettes began throwing mana one after another. By that time, Kirem had only acceleration artifacts left. By commander's order, the girl brought them to combat readiness and dealt blows to targets one after another. To all others, the Imperial Army commander, Evershade, ordered to organize evacuation of residents from Dead City since the battlefield situation got out of control. Approaching Darkut, Ash tried to calm this compassionate warrior. After all, he, looking at what was happening, 100% blamed himself for everything. The commander expressed gratitude to him for his presence. After, Ash von Hyde Evershade, 3rd Prince and recently recognized Lord, asked the young sniper to shoot rats that slip into the city. Standing on Crossroads Watchtower, the young commander understood the severity of the situation, but still didn't lose hope for a favorable outcome of this battle. Lucas strategically looked at the situation that developed at the city line. The thing was that the entrance to the city was narrow. Thus, it was easier to exterminate rat scum. Meanwhile, at the moment of activating the fire artifact, which had already charged, shoals of rats began approaching Kiram's feet. Ash entered hand-to-hand combat with them. At the foot of the crossroads, among troops guarding the fortress entrance, there were significant losses. Rats began climbing to the observation deck along walls. At the moment when typical nerd already wanted to drop everything and reload the game for the 742nd time, on the battlefield, Ash saw unusual sparkle. So epically onto the battlefield came out that very Prince of Borders, former lord and ruler of Dead City, and currently acting local alcoholic. Despite this, he knew military affairs. Bursting into the very epicenter of death, the old man no longer feared this old woman with a scythe. On the contrary, it seemed he was challenging her, so that together with him she would drag away monsters too. Chopping ratmen left and right, the old man remembered his stormy youth when he first met the girl who conquered his callous heart. He remembered himself hot, young, reckless lord, trained only in military affairs. He was so far from romance that it seemed he hadn't lived before meeting her. In this godforsaken city, she dreamed of opening a flower shop, while he, a warrior from brain to bones, believed a weapon shop would be more appropriate here. But the one to whom he later dedicated his whole life knew how to convince him. Each time looking into her eyes, he began to believe that on the front lines flowers would be more needed than spears, cannons, and shells. By duty of service, he often stopped by her shop, which she did open. He learned to distinguish roses from daisies, and a year after meetings, he proposed to the girl. He himself periodically went on combat campaigns, and meanwhile, his home life went its course. 9 months after the wedding, his wife gave birth to a sweet little girl. Arriving home from another battle, the young lord for the first time in his life held in his hand something besides weapons. This wasn't just a child. The daughter became his meaning. Not descending down, Von Hyde ordered Lucas to provide all possible support to the Prince of Borders, to which the warrior in armor answered the old man was managing well himself. Being in the epicenter of deadly events, the Prince of Borders couldn't understand what he was doing here. Why wasn't he sitting at home now savoring some port wine? Moreover, he promised his beloved to meet his death at her grave, which was located in his beloved garden. One thing he understood clearly, he must protect his home, his garden, her grave, and of course flowers. Flowers she loved herself and taught him to love. But suddenly, an unnatural silence reigned around. Screams, howls, squeaks stopped. The Prince of Borders even managed to think he was dead, but Lucas approached and said all monsters were killed. Could he, an old man with a sick back and legs, manage to defeat this entire army of ratmen alone? Although, it became so easy for him that he didn't want to argue with Lucas. Actually, the situation was terrible. Charon received multiple wounds incompatible with life. He lay in a pool of his own blood and incoherently asked to be lifted. The prince lifted the old soldier and he addressed his warriors with a farewell speech. He asked them not to mourn him and asked the prince to tell his daughter he loved her. After the Ratman monster defeat, the need for evacuation disappeared. Townspeople again had a reason for celebration. Meanwhile, His Highness, Ash von Hyde Evershade, returned to his estate after the battle. The first to meet him was the city manager, game creator, director of Empire Defense. Oh, how the Lord waited for this moment, grabbed the scumbag by the collar, and began demanding a report from him for all unexpected updates and additions in the game. Ash reminded this slug Adar of everything, both living armor on the previous level and the jester with the flute at this stage. But the Four Eyes called the necklace the reason for all surprises. But to reveal all the capabilities of this necklace, typical nerd must pass one more level of Empire Defense. Without this, it would be impossible for him to return to his reality. Having walked to Prince of Borders Charon's house, Ash and Lucas assessed damage with their own eyes. It was colossal, but fixable. Being small, Charon's daughter, Neelan, during battles with monsters near the city, often ran to Mom's room, and Mom calmed her down. At that time, the young wife of warrior Charon was herself scared to death. But she wasn't scared of those creatures her husband fought, but his non-return from the battlefield. In memory of the brave soldier of his army, His Imperial Highness, Ash von Hyde Evershade, Third Prince, personally came to visit fallen Charon's daughter. The second meeting of Ash with Neelan was as unpleasant as the first. The thing was, the girl suffered slightly after the strike on the estate and inadequately perceived information. In memory of brave warrior Charon, Ash, gathering patience, tried for the 100th time to introduce himself to the girl and explain the situation. "I'm Ash von Hyde Evershade, Third Prince." But the girl, despite general weakness, was sharp-tongued and declared if he was some prince, then she was the Grand Duchess of Dead City and all the district. To quickly finish the circus and dot all I's, the prince had to show Nellin the royal family sign. Having convinced herself that before her was exactly the one she'd been fascinated with lately, the girl became slightly embarrassed, blushed, and then confessed she admired him. While Charon's daughter chattered to him about her childhood, bad relations with dad, successful studies at military academy, the prince knew all this but didn't interrupt her. Since Nellin studied 3 years at the academy and arrived just yesterday, she wasn't aware of events of recent days, and at the end of her story asked Von Hyde where her father was. Then Ash told his interlocutor in detail about her father's heroic death on the battlefield and about his last request to convey that he loved her very much. Without shedding a single tear, Nellin with annoyance said, "Dad let her down here too. As soon as she decided to show who's boss in the house, he died." His Highness recorded all achievements of the Prince of Borders on the front and submitted a petition to present him for a posthumous award, so the royal medal would be awarded for honor. While Ash told the flighty girl that farewell to her father would take place tomorrow with all honors, she didn't stop looking at him with an almost loving, thoughtful gaze. Coming home, Ash began asking Adar about the new character, and Adar talked about Nellin as if about his child. She's 16 years old, but has her problems. In this release of Empire Defense game, this character has weak characteristics, clumsiness, inexperience, and youthful maximalism, which makes the game difficult. In general, the whole set of negative qualities of a modern teenager, confident in the correctness of actions manifested in her every action, requiring a careful approach. After familiarizing himself with Nellin's capabilities, Ash thought whether to add her to his character list. Idar claimed she was a good and talented player, but Von Hyde promised Karen, lying on his deathbed, that he would take care of his daughter, not drag her into military battles. Doubts tormented the young man strongly. Despite the desire to have in his squad two high-rank fighters, Lucas and Nellin, Ash decided to give the girl an opportunity to choose herself what she really wanted. Nellin walked next to Ash, carefully listening to stories about traps and monsters. She was interested in how the prince and his soldiers coped with danger. Lucas and other fighters walked ahead, checking every corner and carefully watching the movement of shadows. The dungeon smelled of dampness and ancient dust. Idar constantly looked around and shared tactics with Nellin, explaining how to act during sudden monster attacks and how to use magical abilities with maximum effectiveness. Suddenly, from the darkness came the screech of claws, and Nellin shuddered. Ash calmed her down, suggesting that now it was necessary to maintain calm and act strictly according to the team's plan. Kirem, though she was aside, watched what was happening with wariness. Her gaze said she was ready to intervene in case of unforeseen danger and protect the team. When they approached the dungeon's first large room, before them appeared old chests and intricate traps that required caution and teamwork to overcome. Nellin, feeling adrenaline, step by step moved forward, trying not to fall behind. She understood that now every mistake could cost someone from the squad their life. Ash told about previous campaigns, sharing experience and stories so Nellin and other fighters understood what difficulties they might face and how to overcome them. Each new crossing of dungeon corridors showed dangers were everywhere here. Even the most experienced fighters must be attentive and quickly react to any threats. Lucas looked back at Nellin and nodded to her, making it clear he trusted her and was ready to support in any difficult situation, since the life of the entire squad depended on their joint actions. So, room number 1, unsheath your weapons, gentlemen. Let's proceed with destruction. Nellin was noticeably nervous, but bravely rushed into battle on par with everyone. To show all her capabilities, Nellin activated to the maximum: damage fixation, liberation, clumsiness, youthful maximalism. The result was evident: lying unconscious. Besides defense from monsters, the whole team had to save the newbie. In general, they passed the first zone quite quickly, despite all adventures and chaos with Nellin. Further were the nooks of the underground city. Here, Ash hoped to find a couple of mana for Torelli. Before going further, they took a short break, discussing the action plan. During the break, Evershade handed Darkhoot new weapons, which he received as a prize for passing the difficult level. The young chaplain was glad for the new toy. They moved on, and here they met a new party of monsters. This time, Lucas and Nellin took matters into their own hands. Ash watched them attentively with tenderness. Even Darkhoot later had an opportunity to apply the new weapon in this battle. Well, what can you say? In the sniper's skilled hands, even a simple mop can shoot accurately. Despite the fact characters had already passed these rooms, Lucas and all others except Nellin also thought the level noticeably became more complex and tension increased. On the way further, the guys found a strange house whose doors and windows were boarded up from outside. What was inside couldn't be seen, as the seals were unusual and mysterious. Walking through the deserted city N, which is located under the lake, young warriors, together with their prince, saw a light silhouette in the distance and decided to carefully follow it. The guys, who had seen thousands of monsters in their lives, sincerely feared meeting a human here. In this section, they saw remains of mechanical combat entities. Finally, in the distance, Ash von Hyde Evershade noticed a familiar person. It was that very Velra, not remembering her name, the one who guides people between worlds. Despite the fact that last time this girl showed loyalty to the military group, one shouldn't relax, and the prince carefully listened, watching everything happening. Velra led everyone into a large, bright room, in the middle of which stood a table with trophies. It turned out she traded these goods, taking payment in manacores no less. Since the prince himself came here for manacores, besides precious stones, he had nothing more to offer Velra for one, but the most necessary item for him. Soldier's lack of composure simply amazed Commander Torona, who wanted to buy century-old ginseng for rejuvenation, but such fuss reigned around that it seemed impossible. Lucas looked at some fast-running boots for himself. After the question why they were needed, the young man answered he wanted to acquire them for the prince's convenience when moving. Darkhoot drew attention to a potion maker. This would be an excellent solution for hospitals and wounded, but his choice also didn't suit Ash's taste, as usually happened in such cases. For fun, Von Hyde asked Nilin what she looked at here for herself, but the girl turned out the most serious among all and immediately chose a spear and shield, considering this necessary. Oh, how could they all forget about the most important thing? The Lord asked Velra if there was among this junk what was needed. And what do you think? It turned out he found exactly that. Despite the possibility to buy only one item, Velra met new acquaintances halfway and allowed to take 2 items if they promised to visit her again. Niline was embarrassed, seeing a gift for her in the prince's hands. She even refused to accept it, not knowing how to properly express gratitude and emotions. But Ash applied another weapon of his, a radiant smile, adding the magic word, please, and the girl melted before her idol, instantly accepting the gift. Before leaving the trading shop, the prince, just in case, asked Velra if she met a jester playing the flute here, and the girl told in detail where he could be found. Next was the boss's room, and on the way there, the commander told Nalin about all weak spots of the Ratman, noting 10 mana in each of his joints for effective attack. Due to the newbie's appearance in the team, the boss at this level became considerably stronger, but taking his limbs and torso under fire control, the guys quickly laid this freak down. Applying strategy. After killing the boss, of course, it was necessary to examine trophies in the chest. Lucas, as last time, held Torona, and Evershade carefully studied its contents, assessing value. There were no treasures in the chest, but lay a magical item called Sphere of Being, which had to be given into the right hands of the former captain of the 2nd Squadron, as was decided in advance. Also, at the bottom of the chest lay 2 unused mana cores, so necessary for Torelli, and they were immediately transferred to players to enhance their magical capabilities and battle tactics. On the way home, the Lord's entire team opened a beautiful view of the kingdom under the lake, where the entire area was illuminated by soft light, creating a feeling of fairy tale and calm atmosphere. On the way home, Nilin noticed bright light on one of the royal building's towers, which immediately interested expedition participants and became an assignment for next time for all. All tired and hungry walked home and couldn't decide what to do first, go to sleep, take a bath, or eat, so as not to go to bed completely hungry. Everyone except Torona chose to satisfy hunger before sleep, but there was no ready food left in the refrigerator, and the prince decided to surprise everyone with his unusual culinary abilities. Watching Evershade fuss in the kitchen with cooking, Nalin suddenly remembered her childhood and those nights when she ate with parents while father came home. Then the girl got emotional and said she wouldn't go to father's funeral tomorrow because she couldn't forgive him for his complete absence precisely on mom's funeral day. The Prince of Border's burial was conducted with special honor. The farewell speech was delivered by His Highness the Third Prince himself, but the daughter never came to the ceremony, staying home. Once during a friendly conversation, Lucas began asking Ash about family relations, which immediately alerted Gamer, typical nerd, and made him suspect Lucas guessed something. Several weeks after the last battle, townspeople and all who were in the fortress began preparing for a new offensive. All production worked at full capacity without stopping. This time, enemies would be not rats, but golems in titanium garb, mega-powerful mechanical characters capable of destroying everything in their path almost instantly. This time, Ash von Hyde Evershade must account for absolutely everything, including even instant liquidation of phantom jesters with flutes, so the battle passed without losses for the team. All preparations from time to time Ash discussed with the strongest link of their combat company, Lucas. Despite youth, both showed themselves as skilled strategists. Once, coming to Charon's grave, Ash met Nalin there, who declared her desire to renounce the title, sell the inheritance, and leave forever. In conversation, the girl again began embarrassing the Lord with her sincere admiration for his actions, and he remembered he was trying for the sake of fulfilling her most cherished wishes. When meeting with Idar, city manager, game creator, and director of Empire Defense, Ash asked him to settle all formalities connected with Naelin's inheritance. When Idar reported that the Prince of Border's estate couldn't be sold quickly, Ash instructed him to arrange purchase in his name and send Naelin away as soon as possible. Little time remained before the offensive began, and Evershade ran through various instances, checking preparation, looked into the forge, where 2 brand new automatic guns already awaited him. So came the last day of peaceful life, the last day before a seemingly difficult battle. Ash thought about what to spend these hours on, completely immersed in thoughts. And what was beautiful in his life? Of course, Naelin. Today was her departure day, and Von Hyde came to say goodbye and wish luck in a new stage of life. The Lord brought his young friend an envelope with money for the first time, in which were enough funds so she could start independent life from scratch without unnecessary worries. Surprisingly, today Naelin was inclined to change her decision and stay in the city. However, to send her to a safe place, the prince insisted she leave. Unexpectedly for himself, after saying goodbye to Charon's daughter, the prince wanted to cry. He cried, but created the appearance of simply looking out the window, thinking over the future defense plan. Having gathered his group of close fighters, the Lord discussed with them the situation and possible threats. Among those present, of course, was one dissatisfied with work, which slightly spoiled the atmosphere. During the meeting, His Highness solemnly presented Darkut with new magical weapons. The young chaplain was sincerely glad for such an unexpected and valuable present. Suddenly, the door to the conference room opened with a crash. Without knocking, entered an ordinary gunsmith and reported enemy offensive had already begun, and almost no time remained for deliberation. While all present were freaking out, he added enemies divided into 2 groups. Part was going to the fortress, part was moving toward the Prince of Border's estate, which complicated defense. At this moment, typical nerd remembered that Naelin during farewell said to Ash that before departure, she would still go to the garden to parents' graves to say final goodbye. Evershade came out to the watchtower to assess the problem's scale. Enemies were already in the visibility zone, and he immediately ordered to prepare cannons for battle so defense would be ready. Sending old-school soldiers to the Prince of Border's estate to protect the last representative of the Charon family was cancelled due to lack of experienced fighters and other resources. Due to a confluence of shitty circumstances and feelings of guilt, as well as hopelessness, the third prince lost it far and long. He cursed everyone and everything and didn't send soldiers to certain death. Thus, only the fortress and entrance to the city remained under defense. Other directions were completely open for attack, and complex strategic tasks had to be solved. There, on the observation deck, the young lord addressed soldiers with a speech, convincing them not to leave the fortress to save one Naelin, otherwise the city would fall together with her. Meanwhile, the daughter of the Charon family walked through the garden and carefully observed how father carefully cared for trees, which gladdened her soul and heart. The girl would very much like to see spring in her native land, especially when tree buds had already begun to bloom, but ahead was a journey, and she had to leave. At this very beautiful moment, someone pushed her to the ground. It turned out to be a huge golem, and not one, but a whole regiment of these walking iron creatures surrounded the girl. What should a fragile, small girl do with these huge walking iron pieces? How to apply and practice knowledge and experience gained at the academy over years of study. And she, as a true daughter of her father, without hesitation and pity, rushed into unequal battle of human with metal, not supposing the fight would end only in escape. Having defeated the first enemies, the girl came out to the clearing, intending to help the prince and his army. But suddenly before her eyes appeared a whole regiment of golems, and she decided to run. But a girl is a girl, even in the desert, and running from monsters, she accidentally twisted her leg, fell to the ground, and, not enduring the pain, cried from offense and fear. She suddenly felt so sorry for herself, and while monsters weren't catching up, her whole life flashed before her eyes. Childhood, games, joy, learning, and first victories over fear. But suddenly, noticing a tall, slender shadow next to her, the girl raised her eyes and saw him, her savior, the third prince, who came in time and involved in rescue. The Imperial Army commander handed Naelin a vial with red liquid and ordered to drink immediately, although strength gradually left her body. After she drank this medicine, the body began to strengthen, and Naelin could stand on her feet, following her idol, Von Hyde, bravely. Then he ordered her to stop and step back a little, but to her surprise, Naelin wanted to obey, obediently stood right behind his back. Here Ash activated the boss summoning scroll found in one of the chests, and honestly, Naelin felt unpleasant but exciting goosebumps. Suddenly, the earth shook, everything around seemed to freeze, and before the familiar game characters appeared a new one, huge as a skyscraper, Iron Golem. Summoning scroll activation was successful, and such an inscription typical nerd immediately saw on the monitor screen, causing surprise and alarm at the same time for everyone. Simply activating such a hellish machine would be unwise, So the prince continued the prank. He blocked all actions of the golem boss for the duration of the experiment. This summoning scroll is single use, so it must be used with full power so all players and the squad get maximum benefit. After blocking actions, typical nerd in Evershade's person activated the friend/foe function, which, to surprise, gave a completely unexpected reverse effect. The golem boss's factory settings got confused, and he went toward his own soldiers, began crushing, strangling, crippling, and killing, completely taking their mechanism out of order. But such a failure, though it was to Nilin and Ash's advantage, didn't last long, after which the army of golems subordinate to the boss rushed after young people quickly. A few meters from them stood a horse, but from the sounds of explosion, this beast got scared and ran away. They had to urgently use the previously thought-out Plan B. Plan B consisted in Nilin concentrating on defense and Evershade attacking. The plan was simple, but its execution didn't go quite according to the conceived scheme, unfortunately. Despite gloves, the prince's hands suffered badly. Pain pierced and responded in the shoulder. The commander applied a healing remedy, and discomfort gradually passed. It would be unwise to give both magical rifles to Darkut, so Ash kept one for his beloved self. Now it would be possible to check its effectiveness in battle. Boom. For a few minutes, it became so quiet and empty around that His Highness thought about a happy ending, but it wasn't him. Somewhere very close was heard a roar and screech of metal. Listening to approaching steps and jumps, a decision was maturing in the young warrior's head. Nilin, of course, despite courage, in a girlish way, was a little afraid of what was happening. Okay, if Plan B isn't enough for you, dear golems, then an experienced gamer will always find a cooler way out. Typical nerd pressed the self-destruct function and prepared. The golem boss was spectacularly scattered around the area. It was quite a fireworks show, but the blast wave didn't take everyone. About 20 creatures remained, and they needed to be fought. Now it was necessary to run. The faster the better. While they hurried to the Prince of Border's estate, one of the shots broke Neelan's shield, which greatly complicated defense. Ash had already run out of Plan A and Plan B, but he had left a mana summoning tool for Tereli, which could save the situation at any moment. Directing the item in the right direction, he managed to teleport Tereli here. Now it only remained to wait for darkness and the moment to act decisively. Being in Father's house, Neelan said she still hadn't forgiven him for not protecting Mom, but understood Father hurried to save daughter at any cost. The prince for the first time saw Neelan, who doesn't rebel, doesn't blame Father, but seeks justification for his actions, and Von Hyde liked such unexpected changes and the girl's maturity. The young lord patted the girl on the head and said if she needed to hate someone, now she could hate him, since he was responsible for everything happening. While young people talked, golems surrounded them, having guessed Tereli could shoot only in one direction, and additional weapons were required for defense. Nilin needed to manage to run to the garden to Father's grave and dig out with hands the Prince of Border's equipment, which she herself ordered to bury so it would be safe. There was no time left for sentiments, so the girl quickly returned with weapons in hands, ready for battle with golems, remembering all Father's instructions and his advice. During attack, it seemed to the girl that Dad stood behind her back and prompted how to properly hold weapons and where better to deliver an accurate and deadly blow. At such a pace, the enemy was defeated quickly, and without losses, Ash watched what was happening and was proud of Neelan, because thanks to her, they remained alive and preserved their strength. After the battle, he lit a fire, but there was no food in the estate, so they dined on elite brandy. The young lady, naturally, didn't like the drink at all. Later, she started something like a childish tantrum because she missed her parents badly. The Lord allowed her to completely vent emotions. By morning, when the young lady fell asleep, Von Hyde visited the Prince of Border's grave and told him everything would be fine with his daughter and there was no more danger. Returning to the city with the child was dangerous, so he waited for his soldiers to come here, to the estate. And finally, they came at the appointed time. Upon returning home, Ash underwent a course of treatment, but his hand hadn't fully recovered yet. Although compared to events, this wasn't a great loss. Soon, Lucas made a detailed report on conducting the battle. Thus, His Highness learned in detail there were only 14 wounded total and 0 killed. After the battle with golems, typical nerd received a new rank and capabilities of Unbending Commander. This gave protection to all warriors within a radius of 10 meters. The battle didn't go quite smoothly. Darkut again damaged his eyes, but his treatment was proceeding successfully, and he gradually was recovering without problems. Instead of attracting attention, the young commander rested in his estate's garden, where Neelan unexpectedly found him and greeted him. The girl sat down nearby, worried about the Lord's well-being, and reported she wanted to stay in the city forever. Wow, typical nerd had the honor of communicating with Countess Charon herself. Nalene, with her characteristic youthful maximalism, convinced Ash that she was already an adult and quite capable of living independently, fighting in the Imperial Army. Evershade listened to her with effort, then flicked his finger on her nose and assured that until adulthood, she would be under his responsibility, and we'll see further. And the commander also emphasized that to him, she was no countess until he himself decided she had matured and was ready for independent decisions. Coming to his chambers, he couldn't wait to see his new rewards. The necklace's hidden ability was fully unlocked and immediately manifested its power. The new capability pleased typical nerd, but he didn't understand what exactly to prepare for and how best to use the revealed abilities in upcoming trials. Having loaded the threat report, the gamer saw predictions about imminent dark events, but what exactly was being discussed, since the last attack was successfully repelled by him without problems? Only one thought came to the experienced player's mind. Someone was clearly putting sticks in his wheels. What to do about this, he didn't know yet and decided to simply go to sleep. Meanwhile, the capital of Empire Granita flourished in all directions: port, factories, art, construction. It was immediately visible the ruler here was good and caring. In the chambers of Dark Peaks, another meeting was held regarding the third forgiveness of help for Ash von Hyde's Imperial Army. The middle brother didn't approve this decision of the younger. He had a more serious battle going on in the district's south, so wasting the number of soldiers wasn't in his style. He preferred to act cautiously and strategically. While the youngest imperial son was struggling with defense of Crossroads and Dead City, the middle son sat in the capital's administration, and the eldest fought on the front line together with ordinary soldiers. The emperor himself, father of these three eagles, hadn't left his chambers for a long time. There were even rumors he had died, so sons would soon divide power and responsibility for the empire. While Dad was experiencing a midlife crisis, anarchy couldn't be allowed in the empire, and the middle brother temporarily received power to maintain the situation in order. Suddenly, a messenger entered the middle brother's office with a request for reinforcements and signature on an order to carry out death penalty of homeland traitors, which caused instant tension. And then, a cunning idea came to the calculating young man's head. He ordered to send death row inmates as help for the younger, to solve his problems cunningly and without direct risk. Thus, a close person who should have helped harmed Ash, sending him unreliable people and shifting all responsibility for their possible execution onto him. Typical nerd didn't like hospitals, but in Von Hyde's person was obliged to visit Darkhoot. It should be noted the guy, despite injuries, held up bravely and didn't show weakness. Darkhoot promised after discharge to immediately return to the Imperial Army's ranks. Moreover, he even missed shooting, combat training, and the opportunity to prove himself on the battlefield again. Here, Ash reminded him of their long-ago conversation that if Darkhoot's resentment of the Lord for his friend's death didn't pass, he had the right to kill his commander, as the warrior's code required. Today, Evershade came to confirm his agreement with any decision of the sniper, to which Darkhoot said nothing yet, thinking about duty, honor. Soldiers and residents of Dead City arranged festive events in honor of victory, but Ash, as a true commander, visited the wounded and asked about the battle's course. Everyone went to celebrate Victory Day except the Lord. Looking at Torona from the side, it was clear corporate parties were exactly her element, where she felt in her plate. Von Hyde locked himself in his chambers and watched with interest which characters received increased capabilities. Lucas finally was given the long-awaited promotion in combat skills. His new skill, Dash, gave the ability to overcome large distances in fractions of a second. Soon, he would reach the level of a true god of war, and glory was guaranteed to him. Typical nerd's character Ash also received the long-awaited skill Commander's Eye, allowing control of a visible enemy's mind and managing the battle's course strategically. Pressing buttons on the monitor, typical nerd opened the chest with his next item. His dream of a powerful weapon again didn't come true, but hope for the best still remained. He got a magic wand, with which you can create several blades per second. To strengthen combat capability, this of course was very useful. He gave orders to blacksmiths and architects about creating new firearm samples and erecting defensive walls around the city's most important points. After this, the Imperial Army commander went to Kirem and ordered her to prepare air artifacts for the upcoming battle with flying monsters. Toward evening of the same day, he gathered everyone in the estate's backyard and explained this time monsters capable of flying would appear, so they needed to be extremely attentive. At this time, Nilin stood apart from everyone and watched from afar what was happening. When the prince asked her what was wrong, the girl became embarrassed and, without answering, ran away. Darkhoot behaved similarly. To the commander's question what happened, he mumbled something incoherently and again plunged into deep thoughts, silently standing. And only old woman Torona knew what happened with these two, but decided not to interfere in youth's affairs, since she was already considered a lady with quirks and oddities. And only Lucas was always collected, fit, faithful to his cause, and Lord Evershade, demonstrating an example of discipline and reliability in any situations. The team of best fighters, led by the young lord, again went under the lake to explore distant terrain, preparing for new, unexpected, and dangerous trials. Having walked kilometers of dungeons, the guys practically approached the capital of Empire Grantis. In the distance were visible majestic chambers of dark peaks and city fortifications hidden by fog. But their path was blocked by a giant gargoyle, something between an overgrown moron and a dinosaur whose appearance caused horror even in the bravest and most experienced fighters. Having chopped it in two with his sword, Naleen and the others saw dozens of flying gargoyles in the sky, ready to attack and with a threat to destroy everything in their path in this battle. Typical nerd, sitting before the monitor, sincerely didn't envy his characters in this battle because new enemies were resistant to almost all types of weapons. But for characters, everything happening wasn't a game, but reality, and they had to solve problems here and now, acting quickly and calculating every step. In this battle on the way to the Empire's capital, it's worth emphasizing the importance of Mage Tarona's presence. Her skills exterminated gargoyles in batches without mercy. Typical nerd watched tenderly how this old woman frolicked and directly smelled with his nose a salary increase for special services to the Emperor. On the battlefield, it was also impossible to do without first and second rank knights, Lucas and Naleen, since Lucas led very thoughtful and competent military tactics. Naleen relied more on equipment inherited from her father than on her personal experience, but knew how to quickly adapt to new circumstances. Sniper Darkoots and His Highness Evershade's abilities weren't required yet. They watched what was happening from the side so as not to interfere with the developing battle. Next stage, room number 1, killing the boss was routine business, but this time a golden gargoyle appeared here, and sick people were better not taken along. Her gold fever almost ruined everyone. The beast came alive and decided to shake things up so that Tarona almost went to her ancestors prematurely. They had to send Lucas and Naleen to save the former captain of the 2nd Squadron, since mages don't just lie on the road and waiting for help is useless. Engaging with the young ones, the gargoyle threw the old woman into the far corner of the room, from where she, apologizing to the team, crawled to her commander, trying to justify herself. Having decided things were bad, Ash applied his new item in practice, the magic wand, which, according to description, completely subordinates the victim's will and actions to the owner. After several manipulations with the magic wand, the golden gargoyle literally crumbled to pieces and quietly collapsed on the cold floor, noisily crumbling. When the opponent was subdued, the prince approached Tarona and gave a strict reprimand for her bouts of gold fever. Madam apologized and promised to keep herself in check. In the golden gargoyle's chest was a golden cloak with the effect of imposing fear on enemies. An excellent thing for the team's hero's older generation, without doubt. The golden cloak was solemnly presented to disobedient but so important in the team Tarona, and she nodded restrainedly, understanding all the seriousness of the present moment. On the way, the guys ran into huge royal gates that open only when attacking the human world or when meeting special conditions, carefully guarded. Having come to the safe zone, the whole company found itself in complete silence. Emptiness and unusual silence here were frightening. Guys carefully looked around, tensely silent. And it turned out on both sides sat motionless rows of gargoyles. They didn't attack, didn't growl, peacefully watched as if awaiting orders, motionlessly keeping order in shadow. And a little further behind them stood archers with masks on faces. But how familiar for Evershade were these masks, like ghosts of the past, causing a slight chill down the spine. Inside the prince, everything chilled from fear, but outwardly, he looked calm, imperturbable, greeted all those present and through a smile tried to hide internal tension. But from their facial expressions, it was visible guests weren't welcome, and it wasn't a fact they'd even treat them to tea. Tension hung in the air, like an invisible leash, pulling behind. Suddenly, from the crowd, a low, even sexy voice was heard, which no one here expected to hear, but it seemed strangely familiar to the prince. The Imperial Army commander suddenly lost it and shouted into the darkness to the stranger to come into the light, if he was, of course, a man and ready for meeting with the army. And suddenly from the crowd began appearing a short figure in a cap hood and long flared cloak, which slowly approached the soldiers. The Piper! This is the one who tooted on the flute during the Ratman invasion. The famous Jester Phantom now stood before soldiers, causing mixed feelings. Now this scumbag stood opposite brave soldiers and with obvious contempt looked at fighters loyal to their empire, as if testing their patience and courage. Bowing forward slightly, the stranger called himself disloyal to the empire, former court musician Carl, which surprised everyone and made part of the army fall silent. And then, typical nerd remembered this dude from the last round of the game. Then he was quite harmless and funny character for all players. These people in masks were there too, but typical nerd didn't remember their abilities. Apparently, They weren't too important for the course of events and didn't leave vivid impressions. And then Carl asked Ash, "How's the game going?" But why did he start talking about the game? Could he have guessed the prince here isn't real? But typical nerd himself is now in the game? Von Hyde didn't betray his excitement, but learned from his interlocutor he wasn't welcome here, and understood he'd have to act cautiously not to provoke conflict. When archers prepared for battle, Ash understood it was time to act. He decided to activate his new skill, mind control, acting decisively. And strangely enough, it worked the first time. All soldiers of the Piper Flutist froze in place, like living statues, and couldn't move a step. The guy's company hastened to leave while mind control worked. Leaving, the Lord promised this wasn't the last meeting, and left behind confidence in the future. Carl watched them leave and understood the prince's skills had significantly expanded. The archers missed, and they released arrows, but couldn't achieve accurate hit. Nalin waited for this maneuver and prepared a shield to protect from arrows, instantly reacting to the opponent's movement and demonstrating amazing agility and reaction. Now, archers resorted to magic. They sent wind and flame after the Lord and his friends, a hellish mixture of elements, demolishing everything in its path without mercy. Having looked at this performance, old woman Torona declared she would now show them what it means to play magical chess. She launched at them a couple of strongest maneuvers. But the response to her was stunning, in the literal sense. Typical nerd ran to the teleportation point, trying to escape from Torona's magic's destructive power. Glory to the Holy Squirrel, as deceased Charon said, they managed to slip back home. Limping and wheezing, Torona asked to pour her 100 grams of white for strength recovery. Evershade after this trip sat long in the temple and thought about the game, about reality, about his capabilities, and couldn't decide what to do if something went wrong. The prince visited in the hospital his oldest soldier, and Torona was in serious condition, and it's unknown when she would fully come to herself. Ash thought to replace Granny with Kirem, but she wasn't so experienced and didn't want to work at all, so the decision was postponed for later, without haste. When everyone in the estate went to sleep, the young lord paced the gloomy corridor, thinking everything through, trying to find the right and correct solution to the situation. Suddenly, the city manager, game creator, director of Empire Defense ran into him, and Ash even tripped him, from which he collapsed right on the floor in surprise. But, as if nothing had happened, he stood up and reported very important information. There would be no help. Soldiers sent from the capital escaped on the way to the military base. Here, typical nerd, and the Lord and Principal too, lost it, and he began strangling Idar for being inactive, even in the most difficult and critical moment. Having broken free from the death grip, the Four Eyes began chattering. He entered all these fugitives' data into the database to prove his complete professionalism and ability to work. Ash Googled, and it turned out these fugitives were extremely dangerous criminals, but they were sent here as military help for the Third Prince's army. The Four Eyes, in proof of his complete professionalism, found the place where they went to ground, carefully studying the terrain and accounting for all details of possible defense. Half an hour later, Von Hyde's entire company was approaching that place. The guys liked to fool around even at work, and this added a bit of chaos to the serious situation. The escort squad's chief swore and vowed it wasn't he who helped dangerous repeat offenders escape, and the Third Prince believed him completely. Having walked to the place where presumably the convicts hid, the Lord and his subordinates carefully went inside, carefully looking at every corner. There, a terrible sight met them. Corpses with knives in their backs lay scattered throughout the yard, and blood still in fresh tracks flowed down stones. In the house, they found one of the bandits, who confusedly told how they stopped carriages on the road and mercilessly robbed them, hiding from the guard. But they didn't know prisoners were in the carriage and, when they opened the door, saw them, but didn't manage to neutralize. Those ran away swiftly. Ash listened to this delusional report, and only two things interested him: who hated him so much in the Empire's capital, and where now were these damn prisoners. The Lord informed the escort squad's chief that upon returning to the estate, he would receive lifelong punishment for negligence and failure of the entire operation. Suddenly, Nayland called everyone to this dilapidated shack's backyard. There, standing on their knees, were all 5 criminals, having chained themselves and not wanting to run away. Judging by race and hair color, these were ordinary court elves who were previously seen at balls and holidays at court, but no one expected trouble. Despite the fact help came supposedly defective, Evershade was glad even for this, since any help in such a situation seemed priceless and very timely. This was the capital's secret squad of the Empire, performing all dirty work, ICAS Counterintelligence Corps. Google gave such information at typical nerd's request. After the prince told captives part of the truth about themselves, one of the 5 began supplementing what was said with surnames and ranks they had in service. Ash read the resolution about sending these 5 falcons to him in the regiment, and the signature at the bottom seemed too familiar to him and evoked memories. And typical nerd also Googled information about possible reasons why they didn't want to escape, but, on the contrary, so persistently asked to carry out their execution. It turned out their relatives were in enemy captivity, and after criminals' execution, their relatives would be freed. The prince said he himself would decide what to do with reinforcement. Von Hyde explained to his captives in simple words, "If you're killed, it's not a fact relatives will be pardoned. And if you serve the Imperial Army's prince, there's a chance to rehabilitate. Moreover, the place where prisoners' relatives are kept might be destroyed during new offensive of flying gargoyles, so it needs to be defended and strategy preserved." 5 death row inmates stood before a difficult choice, their own meaningless death or a chance to save relatives, which gave hope for the future and chance to survive. In the end, they made a unanimous decision to serve faithfully and truly the third prince and have the opportunity to save their relatives, preserving honor and duty. That's how you need to know how to negotiate. Conducting dialogue with the opponent turns out not difficult. You just need to show him the real benefit of entering the deal. Upon arriving at the place, all 5 captives were secretly placed in the lord's estate, and the security chief was informed the execution was carried out. The opportunity to take a bath and clean beds, they rejoiced like children. Essentially, they were still children, despite their adult and serious positions. To somehow establish contact, Ash filled a full basket of treats and came to the condemned in the room. Dinner passed in a relaxed, almost homely atmosphere. During morning formation, each of the mercenaries told in detail about his skills, abilities, and features, so Ash understood each fighter's strong sides. Previously, they were under the command of the Counterintelligence Corps' Commander-in-Chief, Second Prince Alpha, who with strict methods kept the entire squad in constant readiness. As a sign of their devotion to His Highness, captives handed over the control panel for their collars. In case of disobedience, Ash just needed to press a button, and collars would explode. Especially for elves, the Lord hired an experienced vegetarian cuisine cook who knew how to prepare the most unusual dishes from fresh and rare ingredients. Coming to the forge, Evershade picked up his new order, a golden mana core made from Naelin's broken equipment, carefully checking the blacksmith's work quality. And the blacksmith also gave 3 pistols of Cerberus brand. This name was invented by typical nerd. Each of 3 specimens looked perfect, and Ash couldn't stop playing with them. Each of 3 weapon specimens was made with ideal precision and balance. Ash went through them, experiencing excitement and desire to test them as soon as possible. Von Hyde also asked to create another golden mana core, capable of holding incredible power, and also strengthen its properties for future battles. And another armor from Boss Equipment, but this armor should be light, flexible, and more similar to magical attire, suitable for casters and wizards. Next, the Lord visited were alchemists. He instructed them in detail about repairing the wind artifact and its magical calibration. Well, and how could it be without Kirem? The Imperial Army commander came to cheer her up and inform about preparation for new war, and also discuss the territory defense plan. Kirem asked to bring to her 5 captives, since she wished to be their mentor, teach them new skills, and help them fully reveal hidden abilities. Kirem, not missing the boss's good mood, asked to appoint her head of the archive, and Ash, appreciating the initiative, without hesitation agreed to her proposal. Having reviewed the program of upcoming events, typical nerd was shocked that now there would be 2 bosses in the game, and this would significantly complicate upcoming missions. When the Lord brought the elves' commander to meet Kirem, the girl changed in face and quickly called the commander aside to discuss personal affairs and old grievances. Kirem told that once, precisely because of elves, she lost her family and experienced much, and now didn't trust them completely because of previous tragedies. Her parents once sheltered an elf family in their home, and those a year later led into their village an entire army of goblins who completely exterminated the area's residents without mercy. Kirem warned her commander that these captives, despite good treatment toward them, at any minute could betray him. At this time, the elves' commander approached closer to Kirem and began apologizing for accidentally hearing their conversation and for all evil elves caused her. He spoke right words about a common enemy, about what he was doing so his team would live at least one more day, and sincerely asked for trust in himself. But Kirem was adamant in her conviction and unwillingness to work together with him, although she agreed to endure this time and not start conflict. Watching their conversation, Ash was sincerely and unpleasantly surprised by Kirem's second eye. He couldn't even think this girl knew how to hate someone. Leaving the office, the elves' commander asked why Ash trusted them, to which Evershade answered he was here temporarily and didn't particularly worry. The next day, Ash and Lucas brought military uniforms for fair-haired recruits who should have been killed, but they were lucky. Or unlucky? Unknown. The Shadow Squad was fully equipped with new military uniform and shoes. They were also issued camouflage uniforms for covert operations and night raids. 2 days later, the siege of von Hyde's fortress began. Internal conflicts among his inner circle worried, but now most important was only victory over the enemy. The sky suddenly became covered with black storm clouds, but weather wasn't a hindrance for Gargoyles' flights, who flew in flocks over the fortress, ready to attack. Gunsmiths had already taken their positions. The prince came out to them and gave a command not to relax and not spare projectiles in battle. According to His Highness, the only thing gunsmiths should do throughout the battle was fire from guns 24/7 without break. As a result of such fire activity, there hadn't been in this area since the world's creation. From burning cores, the cobblestones at the fort's foot suddenly choked. Since this time, the Empire's enemy had the ability to fly. Defeat was received with air-to-air calculation, and hits inflicted maximum damage on him. Besides, simple firing at target at flight level, an air death trap was created, where gargoyles flew like moths to light and immediately suffered defeat. At the general meeting of top military leadership, gargoyle physiological abilities were discussed, since they fly due to magical influences and their unusual strength. The wind artifact can help with this, which was recently modernized by local alchemists and now capable of blocking part of the enemy's magical energy. Fire just burns them, but doesn't land and doesn't deprive of life. Consequently, it's necessary to deprive them of this magical influence for complete threat neutralization. Kirem applied a massive efforts for coordinated work and artifact reloading, so each installation worked without failures and provided maximum effect. Thanks to strategic thinking of His Highness, the third prince, and newest technologies, it was possible to eliminate gargoyles' flight skills completely and forever. When flying creatures began falling from the sky to earth, most of them died, and the rest were finished off by ground troops, leaving no chances to survive. Before the second wave of gargoyles' offensive, the commander apologized to his soldiers for what he would now do, and added it was unpleasant for him to be so superstitious. He ordered his inner circle to turn their backs to him, after which he lightly beat them with the magic wand, believing this would give them more strength and confidence. Darkhoot was the first to feel the effect of this ritual. In a second he matured, strengthened, and cheered up. The same unexpectedly happened with other squad fighters. The break between attacks ended, and the sky again rippled from gargoyles. They, like locusts, flew to slaughter, sparing no one, piercing everything around with their onslaught. The young lord was so confident in his victory, he even managed from time to time to put his appearance in order, checking the form and shine of armor. Then everything spun, whirled. It was difficult to make out who was friend and who was foe in this whirlpool of death, but team and gun's cohesion helped survive. A bit later, Ash was fortunate to see Lucas's new skill, Dash. Speed together with Flash was spectacular, lightning fast, and left everyone in admiration. The moment came to implement the captive's Shadow Squad into the combat collective. They came out onto the observation deck under colleagues' close and attentive gazes. Elves rolled out Vulcan, a combat installation with a crown of rotating barrels, erases everything within a radius of 200 meters, created for suppressing armies and storming fortresses. At this moment, typical nerd got a bit distracted by SMS in the game. It reported that 2 bosses were already invisibly on the battlefield. Von Hyde began looking more carefully into the distance, and for now couldn't make out anything except dust, fire, and gargoyles around the fortress. But after a few moments the air shuddered, earth swayed, and over the fortress suddenly hung the huge carcass of a mighty boss, threatening everyone. This was the Legion's leader himself. He perched on the observation deck's edge, thrusting claws into the reinforced concrete slab, preparing to attack the daredevils. At this time, at the place where artifacts were installed, the second boss was landing, trying to crush with his weight such important weapons for the entire battle. At the place of those artifacts where the second boss fell was Kirem. As a result, the girl flew out of the wheelchair and was falling down, losing control. The elves' commander caught her in his arms, exactly the one to whom she said to his face about her hatred for his entire race, saving her life without hesitation. His Highness watched the historical course of events and was pleased with his game, as well as all actions and strategies of characters involved in the battle. To avoid destroying all artifacts, some of them were installed in different places. The time came for Kirem to carefully activate part of them. But the girl lost her wheelchair, and without it couldn't move. Then Reuben, that was the elves' commander's name, carefully picked her up in his arms and carried her to artifacts. For close combat with gargoyles, the prince sent his most experienced fighters, Neelan and Lucas. It was visible these guys wanted to enter the history of battles for the Empire. 2 second-ranked knights, armed to the teeth. This is a big striking fist, but not so strong as to completely fell such 2 massive bosses' carcasses. Gargoyles' bosses wore super fashionable armored armor, and under them flesh in magical shell. First need to break armor, then with Cerberus remove protection. 3 from the Shadow Squad were wounded. This significantly reduced Von Hyde's Imperial Army combat readiness, but reflecting on losses now was absolutely not the time. Despite the fact bosses were still on their feet, alive and well, as they say, Lucas and Naylan also stood unshakably, although shield and spears bent slightly from blows. Finally, Kiram reported the artifact, Magical Amplifier, was fully charged and ready for battle. Oh, how long everyone waited for this moment, and the artifact was launched. But its impact power was increased due to activation of the third prince's skill, Commander's Eye. This worked on the principle of establishing eye contact with the victim. When contact with the victim's body was established, Ash gave a command to one of the boss's subconscious to kill his comrade. The thing is, gargoyles aren't resistant to magic. The command was immediately executed. One boss attacked another, and scraps of metal together with flesh flew in different directions, striking everyone around. But the Commander's Eye skill also had a negative effect. Physical and magical forces left Evershade's body, and he barely stood on his feet, struggling to hold on. Although the spectacle of one creature's absorption due to another's madness left no one indifferent, even the prince gained strength from this.